In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
Today we're reading from Ilhan Papp's book, The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine. This is from the preface. It's titled The Red House. The Red House was a typical early Tel Avivian building, the pride of the Jewish builders and craftsmen who toiled over it in the 1920s. It had been designed to house the head office of the local Workers' Council. It remained such until toward the end of 1947 it became the headquarters of the Haganah, the main Zionist underground militia in Palestine. Located near the sea on Yarkon Street in the northern part of Tel Aviv, the building formed another fine addition to the first Hebrew city on the Mediterranean, the White City as its literati and pundits affectionately called it. For in those days, unlike today, the immaculate whiteness of his houses still bathed the town as a whole in the opulent brightness so typical of Mediterranean port cities of that era and that region. It was a sight for sore eyes, elegantly fusing Bauhaus motifs with native Palestinian architecture in an admixture that was called Levantine, in the least derogatory sense of the term. Such too was the Red House, its simple rectangular features graced with frontal arches that framed the entrance and supported the balconies of its 2 upper stories. It was either its association with the workers' movement that had inspired the adjective red, or its pinkish tinge that it acquired during sunset that had given the house its name. The former was more fitting as the building continued to be associated with the Zionist version of socialism when, in the 1970s, it became the main office for Israel's kibbutzim movement. Houses like this, important historical remnants of the mandatory period, prompted UNESCO in 2003 to designate Tel Aviv as a World Heritage Site. Today, the house is no longer there, a victim of development, which has razed this architectural relic to the ground to make room for a car park next to the new Sheraton Hotel. Thus, in this street, too, no traces left of the White City, which it has slowly transmogrified into the sprawling, polluted, extravagant metropolis that is the modern Tel Aviv. In this building, old Wednesday afternoon, 10 March 1948, a group of 11 men, veteran Zionist leaders, together with young military Jewish officers, put the final touches on a plan for the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. That same evening, military orders were dispatched to the units on the ground to prepare for the systematic expulsion of Palestinians from vast areas of the country. The orders came from a detailed description of the methods to be employed to forcibly evict the people: large-scale intimidation, laying siege to and bombarding villages and population centers, setting fire to homes, properties, goods, expulsion, demolition, and finally planting mines among the rubble to prevent any of the expelled inhabitants from returning. Each unit was issued with its own list of villages and neighborhoods as the targets of the master plan. Codenamed Plan D, Dalet in Hebrew, this was the 4th and final version of less substantial plans that outlined the fate the Zionists had in store for Palestine and consequently for its native population. The previous 3 schemes had articulated only obscurely how the Zionist leadership contemplated dealing with the presence of so many Palestinians living in the land that the Jewish national movement coveted as its own. This 4th and last blueprint spelled it out clearly and unambiguously. Quote, "The Palestinians have to go," end quote. In the words of one of the first historians to note the significance of that plan, Simcha Flapan, the military campaign against the Arabs, including the conquest and destruction of the rural areas, was set forth in the Haganah's Plan Dalet. The aim for the plan was in fact the destruction of both the rural and urban areas of Palestine. As the first chapters of this book will attempt to show, this plan was both the inevitable product of the Zionist ideological impulse to have an exclusively Jewish presence in Palestine, and a response to developments on the ground once the British cabinet had decided to end the mandate. Clashes with local Palestinian militias provided the perfect context and pretext for implementing the ideological vision of an ethnically cleansed Palestine. The Zionist policy was first based on retaliation against Palestinian attacks in February of 1947, and it transformed into an initiative to ethnically cleanse the country as a whole in March of 1948. Once the decision was to complete the mission, when it was over, more than half of Palestine's native population, close to 800 people, had been uprooted. 531 villages had been destroyed, and 11 urban neighborhoods had been emptied of their inhabitants. The plan decided upon on 10 March 1948, and above all its systematic implementation in the following months, was a clear-cut case of ethnic cleansing operation regarded under international law today as a crime against humanity. After the Holocaust, it has become impossible to conceal large-scale crimes against humanity. Our modern communication-driven world, especially since the upsurge of electronic media, no longer allows human-made catastrophes to remain hidden from the public eye or to be denied. And yet one such crime has been erased almost totally from the global public memory: the disposition of the Palestinians in 1948 by Israel. This, the most formative element in the modern history of the land of Palestine, has ever since been systematically denied and is still today not recognized as an historical fact, let alone acknowledged as a crime that needs to be confronted politically as well as morally. Ethnic cleansing is a crime against humanity, and the people who perpetrate it today are considered criminals to be brought before special tribunals. It may be difficult to decide how one ought to refer to or deal with in the legal sphere those who initiated and perpetrated ethnic cleansing in Palestine in 1948. But it's impossible to reconstruct their crimes. Anyhow, it continues the ethnic cleansing of Palestine.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Rabbits, rabbits, rabbits. It's the 1st of February. We've got a lot to talk about today. In the first hour of our program, in just a moment, Congressman Mark Pocan will be with us for a National Progressive Townhall Meeting, our Middays with Mark, every other Wednesday here. If you'd like to get in line to speak with Congressman Pocan, he'll be with us for the whole hour taking your calls. The number is 202-808-9925. In the second hour of our program, is the Supreme Court about to put religion over civil society? They just announced that they're going to accept this case of Groff versus DeJoy, in which they're going to decide whether employers and government must be subordinate, essentially, to the religious desires of what I would call religious freaks. We will talk about that at some length in the second hour. This is also the title of my op-ed over at HartmannReport.com today. And also, is the Republican Party putting together a system for parents to snitch on teachers about banned topics like, oh my God, African American history? Yes, I'll tell you the details of that. It's truly grim. In the third hour of our program, Dean Obeidallah, my colleague over on SiriusXM, well, here on SiriusXM, his program is in the evening. I believe it's 7 to 9 p.m. I'd have to look it up. He will be with us. Does Kevin McCarthy, he just wrote an op-ed for MSNBC, does Kevin McCarthy want to ban Ilhan Omar so bigots can be happy? Also, Geeky Science, we don't know about that coffee buzz in our third hour. And a crazy alert. Tucker Carlson wants you to believe that Kamala Harris is taking hallucinogens. Right. The newest rants from the right. But to begin, Congressman Mark Pocan is with us for the hour, taking your calls. He represents the 2nd District of Wisconsin. He's a member and the former co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. He's on the Appropriations, Education, and Labor Committees in the U.S. House. His website is Pocan, POCAN.house.gov. You can him at Rep. Mark Pocan. And Congressman Pocan, Exxon just announced a $56 billion profit for last year. This was when gasoline prices were sky high. A lot of us, from Robert Reich to me, were ranting that this is not inflation, this is corporate price gouging, and they couldn't do it without monopolies. The entire industry is expected to take in $200 billion for last year in profits. And these levels have never been seen before. I think that the oil companies were doing this to try to prevent Joe Biden from becoming president, frankly. I'm curious your thoughts on this.
Well, I think there was just ultimate greed as well. We said this all along. We actually had some communication from oil executives saying that they weren't increasing production because they were maximizing return to shareholders. So they've said it. we said it. Republicans kept putting some subterfuge out there about, Joe Biden and this and that about gas prices. But the bottom line is exactly what you just pointed out. They wanted record profits. It was pure greed. There probably was a political agenda as well. But, at the end of the day, I think their religion is green, cash, the oil companies. And that's what they were after. And that is still an issue that we have to address. In fact, I would argue, this on top of some consolidation issues and other things are some top consumer issues that don't get reported enough but need to be discussed.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm curious, what's on your agenda this week? What's on your radar? What politically and legislatively, what are you looking at, and where are your concerns today?
Yeah, lots going on. I just wanted to give your listeners an update, since your listeners are the ones who helped us create a bill called Save Medicare Act, which is the one that wouldn't allow Medicare Advantage programs, these private insurance company programs, to use the word Medicare. We had a pen and pad yesterday with some reporters, Jan Schakowsky, who's become a lead with Ro and I on the bill this session, and myself. But also last week, the Progressive Caucus had an entire hour member meeting dedicated to learning about Medicare programs. And we had a number of experts in talking about even more than I had known up to this point, possibly some additional things about the scoring and how they try to incentivize doctors to find more illnesses that they're not trying to actually treat, but in order to get more money from the government. The overpayments of $17 billion in 2021, the last year we have that, enough to pay for the expansion of Medicare going into dental, vision, and hearing, if we actually pay private companies. Wow. That didn't have to pay anything back, a whole lot more. So we're out there really trying to talk about this, getting people to understand that only Medicare is Medicare. But, I think this is a classic example of people calling the program on a regular basis, talking about issues that are important to them, finding legislation to put out there, and now, making sure that we're educating the American people so that fewer people get ripped off by these private plans that are calling themselves Medicare.
That is spectacular. Are the Democrats doing anything with George Santos, or are you just kind of letting the Republicans self-destruct around this?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, they can get rid of him, and I think they won't, because obviously they need his vote right now. One member had an injuries in Florida and can't be up here, and for them to get anything of their agenda done, they had 11 priority bills they told us they're going to do in the first 2 weeks. We're in the second month. And they've only gotten, I think, a half a dozen of them done because they can't even agree on the rest of what their easy priority bills were to get done. But George Santos this week voluntarily stepped down from committees. I mean, look, he's under local, state, multiple federal and international investigations. I think it's just a matter of time before he trades it up to try to avoid prosecution. But I think it stands out that they seated a pathological liar on committees, but we could be voting as early as tomorrow to kick Ilhan Omar off of the Foreign Relations Committee. It's just Foreign Affairs Committee. I mean, it's really pretty outstanding, the hypocrisy going on with this majority party.
Yeah, it really and truly is. And let me just remind our listeners, 202-808-9925 is the number if you have questions or comments or thoughts for Pocan. There was a poll that was commissioned apparently by the Lincoln Project folks, asking Republicans if Donald Trump ran on a third-party ticket, would they vote for him? And about a third of Republicans say yes. Is this the dream scenario for Democrats?
I mean, the dream scenario, honestly, in my opinion, someone who's done this now for 30 years and who cares about our country greatly, is that, sanity would somehow take place, and that, Donald Trump wouldn't be a factor, period. That, he would be actually tried for his crimes, and that, Republicans would get back to, having differences, but would get things done. I always think it's dangerous when we wish for, trying to pick their candidates and other things. So maybe, if he could pull votes away, it would be a factor. I don't know if his ego would let him. My main concern is that, Kevin McCarthy is doing just the opposite of what we need. He needs to stand up and be a leader. But because of how dysfunctional his caucus is, each and every one of them kind of seem to pull strings and him. It's not the right direction, and we got to figure that out.
Yeah. I personally think that if he didn't win the Republican primary, he would do this just as a fundraising scam, but who knows? All right, let's pick up some phone calls here. Rose in Chicago on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hey, Congressman. Hey, I live in Illinois, obviously, and a relatively blue state, relatively blue county, Cook County around Illinois. And our governor recently passed an assault weapons ban, Governor Pritzker, and High Capacity Magazine. And of course, it's being challenged in the courts, all kinds of lawsuits. And I'm sure it'll get struck down. So my question to you is, even if there was some kind of miraculous way to get a federal ban on assault weapons like we used to have in high-capacity magazines, what is going to prevent the Supreme Court with their, I won't use the term I was going to use, but their highly twisted version of what the Second Amendment is, how is it going to prevent anything from being just struck down? It's just so frustrating. Like I said, I live in a pretty blue area, and for these to be held up and then probably struck down?
Yeah. So first of all, I mean, just yesterday I was on the floor, and David Cicilline, who's the lead author of Island, was going around giving cards to freshmen to get them to sign on to the bill. So our efforts are going to continue to try to get this to become law again, and that might be the saving grace, is that it's law again. The fact that it was law for a long time in the United States, that we can have some standing based on that. Of course, as you mentioned, the Supreme Court is very politicized. We saw almost a half a century of law under Roe versus Wade get thrown out, but that does give it some extra credence and credibility. So you really have to look at, probably many laws to see how the Supreme Court might act, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't still get these bills passed, because every time we do, we're educating people and we're putting something in place that helps.
There you go. Congressman Mark Pocan is with us for the hour. It's Middays with Mark on the Thom Hartmann Program, taking your calls. 15 minutes past the hour. Congressman Pocan's website is Pocan, POCAN.house.gov. You can tweet him at Rep. Mark Pocan, M-A-R-K, Pocan. We'll be right back with more of your calls for Congressman Pocan in just a moment.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Representative Pocan is with us for the hour, taking your calls in a national town hall meeting, Middays with Mark. And welcome back. Steve in Arlington, Washington. You're on the air with Representative Pocan.
Hi, Tom. Hi, Congressman. I just want to let you know about what I went through when I tried to go back to Medicare Original from Medicare Advantage, which I've been on since I was 65, and I'm 69 now. They refused me gap insurance because of medical problems I really don't have, and they wouldn't let me back on Advantage for the same reason. And I went through a whole month and a half of trying to get in, back on Original or back on to Advantage, and I finally got Medicare Original back, which I'm amazed. I'm glad.
But you can't get a Medigap policy, Steve?
Yeah, I got one finally. It took a month.
Okay. Yeah.
My Medicare Advantage wouldn't let me back into Advantage. So I had to call another company to get a prescription drug plan, and they finally let me talk to somebody that got me gap insurance. So I'm paying gap insurance and the prescription, and I'm fully covered now.
Remarkable.
I didn't think I was going to get it.
Remarkable.
From what you said, it's really hard. It's really hard.
Yeah.
And I was conned back when I was 65 to Advantage. As people don't know when they're turning 65, they don't know anything about that. So they're getting false information, and they sucker it in, and there you go.
Congressman?
Yeah, Steve, I'm glad you got it taken care of. That's one of the many problems that we have with these programs. They're set up to just make money. In fact, one of the other statistics that we learned too, actually, if I can share, Tom, the companies that do Medicare Advantage make about twice as much profit than traditional health insurance because it's such a profitable area. Some companies, up to 70% of their profit is coming from this area. That's why they don't want to change the programs. And when they do these additional, ailments to get more money out of people, only about 10% of that money that they jack up from what Medicare otherwise is covering with people goes back into care. And the other 90% goes into administrative and overhead and profit at the end of the day. So, many, many, many reasons why we need to talk about these programs a whole lot more.
Yeah, Congressman, we have a little less than a minute left. I'm curious, these companies are literally making billions of dollars every month in profits. It would be fairly easy to peel off millions from that, which is big money in politics, and buy politicians. To what extent, and I'm assuming that probably the entire Republican caucus is with the health insurance companies, how much of a problem is this in the Democratic caucus?
I think people are learning. That's why, the Progressive Caucus doing a whole hour educational effort on this was very helpful. We appreciate what Pramila Jayapal did in that sense. But, Earl Blumenauer used to be a lead of the letter to support these programs. And he told the caucus last week that not only does he not a lead, he doesn't sign the letter anymore because he's learned of the problem. So they've taken converts, people who do a good lobbying job, giving you people who are on their programs in districts say they love it and it sounds good, but they don't talk about most of the problems that we encounter through our casework. So there definitely more and more members understand this problem. But as you pointed out, as profitable as this will be a hell of a fight.
Yeah, I get it. Yeah, that's great. Earl Blumenauer is my congressman, so I'm glad to hear he's had a version experience.
Absolutely.
On the road to Damascus. We'll be right back. It's 20 minutes past the hour. Congressman Mark Pocan is with us taking your calls for the hour, Middays with Mark, and I'll be right back with you right after I read an ad for Cozy Earth Sleepwear over on the commercial side of the show. Stick around, 60 seconds. We'll be right back. Missed my opening today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. One of the things that has always baffled me is why, after the Mueller report found, after the Mueller investigation found that there were 10 explicit prosecutable cases of Donald Trump committing violations of the law by obstructing justice, that when Merrick Garland came, he chose to ignore those. And now I think the statute of limitations has run out on them. I believe it was a 5-year statute of limitations. He had that first year, he could have prosecuted those. Why? Why is it that on October 30th, 2016, Harry Reid, then the head of the Senate Democrats and the of the Senate, wrote a letter to Jim Comey saying it's clear that you have in your possession information about the connection between Trump and are refusing to release it. Yet you rushed out this information that you were going to investigate Hillary Clinton, and there was no there. Why is this? There's a video with the entire letter from Harry Reid over at ThomHartmann.com. Check it out. And welcome back. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. Jeff in Fort Dodge, Iowa. You're on the air with Representative Pocan.
Hi, Congressman. I'm scared to death about this debt ceiling crisis. I don't think the mainstream media and definitely our local channels here in around Fort Dodge and Des Moines area are talking about what happens to the people that once this dealing is hit. And I am sure that there's a lot of these Republicans that want this to just go into default and destroy it, that what these folks aren't going to receive. In other words, they're probably not going to get their Social Security checks. I'm a railroad man of 40 years, retired. Will they cut off and not my railroad retirement benefits? I think that the Democrats need to be out there right now saying, hey, guys, if these guys do this, this is what's going to happen to you, the American, and you, the consumer. And I am not hearing it. And I'm not hearing it about this 30% tax that they want to put out either. So what say you?
So, Jeff, first of all, I'd say you're going to have to expand media sources. We're saying it a lot. In fact, on both issues. First, let me take the debt ceiling. We're pointing out that this is very disingenuous what they're saying. They need to show us a plan. We have our budget that was out and what we passed in the last Congress. They need to show us a plan. The problem is they can't come up with a plan with the Adams family that makes up their caucus. Uncle Fester and Morticia and Cousin It, that's their caucus. So they can't do that. Therefore, they're just, saying we negotiate. But they need to actually put a plan for it, or else it's completely disingenuous. And we are pointing out that Social Security and the full faith and credit of the United States, which could raise interest rates for small businesses and individuals, and all the other things that could happen by not having that money there. The second part, now I'm trying to remember what that was that you brought up.
He's not hearing about the 30% national sales tax.
Oh, absolutely. Between that and then the cuts, Security and Medicare that they want to do, those are the main things that we are talking about. Just another member this week, so we should raise the retirement age for Social Security. This is very much what they intend to do. In fact, I think part of the debt ceiling debate is setting up what they want to do for cuts to Social Security and Medicare. And then this stupid plan to have a 30% sales tax instead of income tax clearly would put the burden on middle-class taxpayers and those who are the poorest rather than the most wealthy. So they keep giving us gifts because Kevin McCarthy can't control his caucus. But we are talking about that every single day. Look at Hakeem Jeffries' Twitter account. Look at other sides. I can't make the media pick up a story, but absolutely members are talking about these things.
Margot in Prairie du Chien, Wisconsin, is that right? Duchesne, okay. You're on the Congressman Pocan, Margot.
I have the greatest respect for both of you, but I'm 76 years old. I've watched this whole thing unfold, and I mean, when is the DOJ going to kick in and put some of these criminals in indictment? If I did that or anybody else did it, we'd be in jail. It forbid if we were brown or black. When are we going to do something? When is our AG going to the plate and start indicting? I mean, I don't need to investigate. We've spent how many thousands, hundreds of thousands, or millions of dollars, and the rich get richer, we get poor. And I want the Democrats to come out and start kicking butt big time, saying what Biden's done and what the Democrats have accomplished. I raised bipartisan. You vote for the best man. I don't do that anymore.
Margot, we're almost out of time here. Let's get Congressman Pocan's response. No, it's just fine. I just have 20 seconds left. That's all.
No, Margot, I share your passion on wanting to see the prosecutions. I think what we keep hearing, and part of the reason they do investigations, is to gather the information and the things they're going to use in court to prosecute. So the legal process is not as quick as you or I would like, but I think that's the point we're looking at.
Step by step, as the old saying goes. Congressman Mark Pocan is with us for the hour, taking your calls. It's Middays with Mark here on the Thom Hartmann Program every other Wednesday. We'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Pocan in just a moment. You can find his website, by the way, at Pocan, POCAN.house.gov, and you can tweet him at Rep. Mark Pocan.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
27 minutes past the hour here in the place where despair is not an option. Stay with us. We'll be right back on the other side of this break.
Planning and Black Study by Stefano Harney and Fred Moten. This is from the introduction. It starts with love, exchange, fellowship. It ends as it begins, in motion, in between various modes of being and belonging, and on the way to new economies of giving, taking, being with and for. And it ends with a ride in a Buick Skylark on a way to another place altogether. Surprising, perhaps, after we have engaged dispossession, debt, dislocation, and violence, but not surprising when you have understood that the projects of fugitive planning and black study are mostly about reaching out to connection. They are about making common cause with the brokenness of being. A brokenness, I would venture to say, that is also blackness, that remains blackness, and will, despite all, remain broken, because this book is not a prescription for repair. If we do not seek to fix what has been broken, then what? How do we resolve to live with brokenness, with being broke, which is also what Moten and Harney called debt? Well, given that debt is sometimes a history of giving, at other times a history of taking, at all times a history of capitalism, and debt also signifies ownership but never delivers on that promise, we have to understand that debt is something that cannot be paid off. Debt, as Harney puts it, presumes a kind of individualized realization to a naturalized economy that is predicated upon exploitation. Can we have, he asks, another sense of what is owed that does not presume a nexus of activities like recognition and acknowledgement, payment and gratitude? Can debt become a principle of elaboration? Moten thinks economic debt Moten links economic debt to the brokenness of being. In the interview with Stefan SCOTUS, who he acknowledges that some debts should be paid and that much is owed, especially to black people, by white people. And yet he says, I also know that it is, that what it is that is supposed to be repaired is irreparable. The only thing we can do is this stuff down completely and build something new, end of quote. The undercommons do not come to pay their debts, to repair what has been broken, to fix what has undone. If you want to know what the undercommons wants, what Moten and Harney want, what black people, indigenous people, queers, and poor people want, what we, the we who cohabit in the space of the undercommons want, it is this. We cannot be satisfied with the recognition and acknowledgement generated by the very system that denies A, that anything was ever broken, and B, that we deserve to be the broken part. So we refuse to ask for recognition, and instead we want to take apart, dismantle, tear down that structure right now. That right now limits our ability to find each other, to see beyond it, and to access the places that we know live outside its walls. We cannot say what new structures will replace the ones we live with yet, because once we have torn stuff down, we will inevitably see more and see differently, and feel a new sense of wanting and becoming. What we want after the break will be different from what we think we want before the break, and both are necessarily different from the desires that issue from being in the dark. Let's come at this by another path. In the melancholic and visionary 2009 film version of Maurice Sendak's Where the Wild Things Are, 1963, Max, the small seeker who leaves his room, his home, his family to find the world beyond, finds a world of lost and lonely beasts, and they promptly make him their king. Max is the first king the wild things have had, whom they did not eat, and who did not, in turn, try to eat them. And the beasts are the first grown things that Max has met, who want his opinion, his judgment, and his rule. Max's power is that he is small while they are big. He promises the beasts that he has no plans to eat them, and that this is more than anyone has ever promised them. He promises them that he will find ways through and around, and will slip through the cracks and re-crack the cracks if they fill up. He promises to keep sadness at bay and to make the world with the wild creatures that roared their terrible roars and gnashed their terrible teeth and rolled their terrible eyes and showed their terrible claws. That Max fails to make the world or to save them or to make the world with them is less important than the fact that he found them and he recognized in them the end of something, essentially the path to an alternative in his world, or an alternative to his world, excuse me. The wild things were not the utopian creatures of fairy tales. They were the rejected and lost subjects of the world Max had left behind. And because he shuttles between the Oedipal land where his mother rules and the ruined world of the wild, he knows the parameters of the real. He sees what is included and what is left out. And he is now able to set sail for another place, a place that is not the home he left, or the home to which he wants to return. Moten and Harney want to gesture to another place, a wild place that is not simply the leftover space that limbs real and regulated zones of polite society. Rather, it is a wild place that continuously produces its own unregulated wilderness. The zone we enter through Moten and Harney is ongoing and exists in the present, and as Harney puts it, some kind of demand is already being enacted, fulfilled in the call itself. While describing the riots of London in 2011, Harney suggests that the riots and insurrections do not separate out the request, the demand, and the call. Rather, they enact the one in the other. The book is The Undercommons, Fugitive Planning and Black Study.
Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. Our podcast, The Hartmann Report, is absolutely free and available wherever fine podcasts are available. And the entire 3-hour podcast is available over at thomhartmann.com. Welcome back. It's Middays with Mark. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour in our National Town Hall Meeting. Patrick in Chicago, you are on the air with Representative Pocan.
Hi, how's it going, Representative and Tom? Thanks for doing this, guys. My question, I've called before. I've asked about the media team, whether or not the Democrats were creating one. I was hoping for an update on that because it seems from the calls today that messages aren't getting out. I understand that the representative is other representatives are making the case and they're making messages, but the simple fact that no one's hearing them is a concern. And, you know, I don't know the way to get it out, but, like, I know that if you can make the message fast enough and you can get it out there, you can make someone like George Santos the face of the Republican Party. And the fact that no one is willing to repudiate him or remove him, make that the Republicans essentially being proven to be liars and cheats. So, like, yeah, I'm hoping that there's some kind of team. I gotta believe that there's volunteers, there's creative people in your staff and among all the staff of people that can get together and just start knocking out funny, viral campaign ads and attack ads against these Republicans. Like, we got to get aggressive people.
Yeah, so Patrick, you're not going to see ads because that costs money, right? And right now people already were outspent by Republicans when it comes to campaigns. What you will see is people talking with a single message on this stuff. I've been in this for 30 years, and I've heard this complaint for 30 years because not everyone consumes media all day. And really, it depends what the media, especially the mainstream media, decides to report. There are literally publications on the Hill since the Republicans took over that have moved reporters only to cover Republicans and don't cover Democrats. Just the reality of Washington is covered inside baseball, just so you understand what's happening. The good news, though, is I have never seen the caucus more organized and communicating together around things like the fact that the Republicans want to cut Social Security and Medicare, the fact that they want a 30% national sales tax and then get rid of income tax for rich people and put the burden on the middle class and those who can least afford it. There is clarity, and members are repeating that. I think the difficulty is, local press has been decimated. So it's really hard to sometimes get that into local newspapers. And, other Tom's program, there's not that many venues where we can really get a lot of this information out in a way that, everyone sees it. But I have heard this complaint since I've been doing this, because, again, people don't consume all media all the time. The good news, though, it really is good news, and I think it's worth mentioning, is I have never seen Democrats more unified. Hakeem Jeffries is really good, especially on this issue of Social Security and Medicare, and going after their brazen attempt to want to raise the age to be eligible and cuts to these programs. And I think we just saw a poll last week that the Republicans were about -20 in their favorability. Independents -46 points. Republicans are in favorability. And the number one issue why is because they think Republicans are going to cut Social Security. And number two, they're going to cut Medicare. So people are getting it. Whether or not individuals are seeing it all in the media, the message is getting out there because we're seeing it come back in the polling.
Holly in Washington, D.C., you're on the air with Representative Pocan.
Hi, guys. I'm, as a taxpayer, kind of offended by the idea of corporate subsidies. And I'm just wondering, maybe Tom knows this, in the history of the United States, did corporate subsidies become a thing where it wasn't a thing before? And if so, what instigated that? And then how do you all try to justify us subsidizing, like, the oil industry with these record profits? I'm having a hard time connecting the dots. Thank you.
Yeah, I hear you, Holly. So it's not just that we actually still subsidize the oil industry, but don't forget much of our tax law, our tax expenditures, that's no different than spending money to invest in healthcare or education. You're investing in tax breaks for various industries. And to me, that's even far worse than the amount that's given as subsidies. It is a subsidy, but it's not seen as that. Most people don't consider a tax break a tax expenditure, but money you're not spending in healthcare for people or veterans. Instead, you're kind of tax break for these special interests that are very effective at getting those. So I think part of it is just, addressing the lobbying influence in Washington, D.C. Part of it is addressing some of the consolidation of companies, because that gives them even more voice in many ways here in Washington. I agree with you. This is something we really need to be able to talk about a whole lot more. And with record oil company profits, we need people besides Democrats recognizing that problem.
George in Coarse Gold, California. You're on the air with Representative Pocan.
Thank you, Tom, and Representative. I think you answered my question a couple of that Democrats don't have money for media, and it goes to C-SPAN. No matter who's the speaker, who's dominant in the White House, that C-SPAN always runs conferences. American Enterprise Institute. All these different right-wing think tanks put on their conferences, and that's all we see, especially during the holidays when there's nobody doing anything in Washington. It's like 24/7 right-wing messages are getting out. I don't know. It's like talk radio. We don't have any leverage in that area.
Doesn't that also go back to money, Congressman? It's that, there's dozens and dozens of these groups that are very, very well funded by the right-wing billionaires, and I can't think of any major left-wing think tanks out there that hold the kind of conferences, the CPAC kind of stuff, the AEI, the Heritage Foundation.
Yeah, Center for American Progress, probably the largest that's out there, but I don't think it's at all the same. I mean, this is one of the reasons why, we have to address Citizens United and the money that goes into politics. I mean, it's bad enough there's 15,000 lobbyists in Washington, D.C., and they aren't advocating for the average in California like George or anywhere. They're very much, lobbying for special interest and in taking that influence of money that goes to campaigns away. Because I can tell you there has been, since I got here, it was less than a handful of people that didn't take corporate PAC money. Now, I believe it's somewhere between 50 and 70 members that don't take corporate PAC money. And you talk to the individual members and how different it is a significant difference, because a corporation doesn't just dangle a check in front of you and ask you to dance, monkey dance. Now they have to, really relate in a different way to you. And that, if we can get that to be expanded on in Washington, we can get even more done. So it's not just that we don't have money for ads right now. It's the whole system that we need to address financially with where those special interests have cash if we're really going to get something done in the public good.
Morris in Long Beach, California. You're on the air with Representative.
Congressman Pocan, I'm going to make it quick. Do you believe that Barr will be called as a witness in a Dominion machine case? Because everybody heard what his ideas were. Do you think they will call Mr. Barr in as a witness in that, even though there might be some question as to his character? He has been accused of unethical behavior. He has been accused of criminal conspiracy. He has been accused of seditious behavior, and he also has been accused of obstruction of justice. Thom Hartmann and a guy named Eli Honey, who wrote a book called Hatchet Man. So he might have some questions regarding his character. But do you think that he might be called as a witness in that case? And I'll take your comments off here. And thank you, Congressman. And good morning, Tommy.
Good morning.
Yeah, Morris, a very unsatisfying answer. I have no idea. I don't know in a court case who might come in as witnesses or not. I don't want to try to just throw out an answer I have no basis for. I really don't know.
Congressman, I was just handed an article from today's Guardian with a picture of you at the very top. Seniors are getting ripped off is the headline. Progressive Congressman Mark Pocan on overhauling Medicare. Congratulations.
This is on the issue thanks to your callers. I mean, this is where the issue has really gotten its life's breath. And now, like I said, not just Ro and I, who appear on your program on a regular basis, but Jan Schakowsky, who's one of the leading advocates for seniors in Congress, is now our third co-lead for this bill going into the next Congress. We have over 20 people right now who've signed on to the bill. We're making some real progress.
That's great. Jan Schakowsky is wonderful. She's been on the program a number of times, too, although she's not a regular. Ed, in Des Moines, Iowa, you're on the air with Representative Pocan.
Hello to both of you. Within the past week, Representative Pocan, Tom had said on his program, and I'm paraphrasing because I don't remember precisely, but he said about a third of the people that join the police force do it for altruistic reasons. Another third do it because it's a socially acceptable, steady job, and the last third do it so they can punish with impunity, or bully with impunity, I guess would be a better way of saying it. Now, I've heard people say that cops should have to have a psychological eval before they join the force, and this is my wife's idea, so I'm giving her credit for it, but I thought it was good enough long, was that they shouldn't only have an initial psychological eval, but an annual one, because people can go in under the first third of altruism, and then after they've joined the force, switch over to the bully with impunity. What do you think of that idea?
Yeah, I don't know enough about that breakup to comment specifically on that, but I had introduced legislation last Congress to have some uniform training level. There is no absolutely zero uniform training to become a police officer, and I think that is one thing that would help, and perhaps what you're talking about could be added to that. But I had a conversation last night. Take a pause from here.
Okay, we've got this problem with Skype ducking on shutting you down when the music starts. We'll pick up that thought on the other side of the break. It's 45 minutes past the hour. Congressman Mark Pocan is with us taking your calls for the hour. We'll be right back with more of your calls for Representative Pocan in just a moment.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Pocan.house.gov is his website. You can tweet him at @RepMarkPocan. Be right back with Middays with Mark. You want to finish that thought, Congressman?
Sure. Last night I had a conversation with several members, and one of the things that came up is it's getting really hard to hire people in police forces right now, just like it's hard to get teachers right now. And part of that could be the problem, and we do have to figure that out, especially diversity in the police force. So a lot of issues around getting the role to be applying.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. Paul in Ellsbury, Missouri, you're on the Representative Pocan.
About the Atlanta, Georgia, the new police base they're going to be building down there. And I'm wondering why the U.S. government would allow them to build a base, a cop base, police base down there where they're also training Israeli soldiers, and they're going to have the Homeland Security and CIA also help down there, and they're giving them Apache helicopters. So I didn't know they could have military people in a civilian kind of base.
And I missed the very first part, Paul.
He's talking about this very controversial down in Atlanta. They're ripping up a forest to build a simulated urban environment. A couple of city blocks where the police can practice. I guess policing within a city, and it's got quite a lot of heat around it.
Yeah, I think one of the issues that we're starting to see just with the recent killing in Memphis, and I was talking to actually the head of the last night about this, was it's a specialized unit all these officers came from, and then that's often who gets the specialized training. So again, I think it does go back, Tom, to what I said, and I don't think enough people talk about this. Is the uniform? There are no uniform standards for training, no matter where you are in the country. as a police officer, that affects ultimately policing, but it also affects what we can expect as a citizen if we're being pulled over or we have a conversation, with a police officer. What are our rights and obligations? All of this is without any uniformity whatsoever.
Yeah, absolutely. David in Los Angeles. David, we have a minute and 15 seconds. A quick question.
Yes. Why doesn't the congressional delegation employ the office of the chairman of the Democratic National Committee, Mr. Harrison? I've not heard a peep out of him very much, except on one occasion that I can remember. And point two, you mentioned recently your interest in branding Democrats by Weber. That's something that needs to be done because the Democratic history over the past 90 years is a record of outstanding public service and public policy. Thank you.
Yeah, I hit both quickly, David. DNC is a completely separate entity. Democrats in Congress, so we can't do that. They're a completely separate entity. Can't speak for them. And to the book Branding Democrats by Ken Weber, I saw Ken this weekend actually. This is a big thing. If we took all the money that we spend individually on races and did it more uniformly and did it on behalf of Democrats and the values of Democrats, I think we would go much farther in electing people from the local to the federal level.
Yeah, and is Jamie Harrison doing a good job in your opinion?
Honestly, Tom, you'd be surprised how little I have to do directly with the DNC.
So you're not sure?
We have the Democrat Congressional Campaign Committee, which is new and starting up, and we have a meeting about making sure progressives have a strong voice in that.
That's great. Congressman Mark Pocan is with us for the hour, taking your calls, back with more of your calls for him in just a moment. I think it'll be, let's see. Oh, yeah, we'll be in 60 seconds because I have to read an ad for American Cruise Lines on the commercial side. Right back in 60 seconds. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. So everybody knows that George Santos is from a district that Joe Biden won by 16 points, New York's 3rd district, although there was a kind of a gerrymandering, a reapportionment thing that happened there. But it's generally a Democratic district, and if Santos falls, there's probably going to be a Democratic replacement. But that's just the beginning of the story. David Valledo in California's 22nd district, for example, represents a district that Biden carried by 16 points. Yim in California's 40th, Biden carried by 15 points. Mike Garcia in California's 27th, Biden carried by 18 points. Biden carried by 11 points, Oregon's 5th, Lori Chavez DeRemer. Ryan Fitzpatrick from Pennsylvania's 1st, Biden carried it by 14 points. I've got a whole video that lists all of these. There's 18 of them that should be easy pickups for the Democrats in 2024. It's over at ThomHartmann.com. Check it out. Picking up your calls for Congressman Mark Pocan. Carl in Chicago, you're on the air with Representative Pocan.
Hi. The documents game, classified and top secret. There are so many documents that are put in the bucket, classified and top secret, that should never, ever, ever go into that big bucket. And it gets larger as time goes on. And nobody bothers to start to go in and check this stuff, classify it, and say, you know what, this never should have gone in there in the first place. And the fact that Donald Trump and Joe Biden, that they have classified documents and top secret documents, if Donald Trump was a master spy and he sensitive documents, that stuff would have been copied a long time ago. He would have returned it and said, oh, sorry, I forgot about it. But he's a pack rat. He got this stuff, they were like mementos. It didn't mean anything to him other than souvenirs of being the president of the United States.
Maybe he sold it to Saudi Arabia for $2 billion, which was given to Jared Kushner. But, Carl, what's your question?
The question is, why make such a big returning the documents when they could be copied in the first place? A lot of this stuff should never be classified in the first place.
Okay.
Yeah, Carl, the big issue, not by documents that now you have with Pence and Joe Biden, but it's the difference between how Mike Pence, Joe Biden, it in Donald Trump. Donald Trump, for months, refused to return documents, refused subpoenas, did everything possible to make it difficult for the collection of any kind of material that could be classified or top secret. And then Joe Biden and Mike Pence did everything the right way, which is as soon as they found a document or brought people in to actually search for them and make sure that anything might have accidentally got there was dealt with appropriately. So it has nothing to do with the classified nature, although I think there's a whole separate conversation you could have on that, Carl. You're right. It really is in how it was handled, and Donald Trump handled it very differently than Joe Biden and Mike Pence.
In Maple Grove, Minnesota, listening to KTNF, AM 950. You're on the air with Representative Pocan.
Thanks for taking my call. Representative Pocan, I was wondering, when I signed up for Medicare, I'm just wondering if, what you guys are all looking. I got confused about the Medicare Part B, and when my private insurance quit up right away, now I'm paying a huge penalty, and that's fine. I understand they don't want to skip getting Medicare B, and then when they get sick, all of a sudden get it. But I've been doing that for going on 2 years now, and it's going to go full time until I die. Is there any talk of making the punishment fit the crime, so to speak?
Yeah.
That it has an end date?
Yeah, I can't say that there's legislation that I know of, but I certainly, part of what also, there's a letter circulating around this, talking to CMS. It gets complicated. What we do know is that Social Security and Medicare are two of the most popular programs. The federal government, it's your money that we've held in a public trust to make sure you have money for or care for when you're older. And there are certainly things that are either inconsistent or could use improvement. I think, dental, vision, and hearing should be covered by Medicare, period. There's a lot of things like that we'd like to do, but also around the Advantage program, CMS, by allowing this payment for illnesses, and then they actively seek them but don't want to treat them, and they make a lot of money off of that and overpayments. Some of those things have to be addressed more immediately. So, letter going around about that. We have the legislation that we produced. But I would say always reach out to your member of Congress or the Senate, share the story, because sometime we have the ability to help people by having a common sense conversation with an agency, and it might behoove you to do that.
Florence, Texas, you're on the air with Representative Pocan. We have a minute and a half to the end of the hour.
Hi, Tom.
Hey.
Hi, Representative.
Hello.
So first-time caller. And my question is, whatever happened to remove the cap on Social Security payments?
It's there. It's in John Larson's legislation, Social Security 2100 Act, which had over 205 or so sponsors in the last Congress. That's what we need to do, right? We need to be able to bring to keep its longevity. It shouldn't be progressive tax like it is now. We're earning $60,000 of income, or give or take, pay another dime. And that is the simplest answer to extending Social Security into the future. So it's out there. It's in major legislation with a lot of sponsors. We just got to get it done.
Congressman, the discharge petition survived the rewriting of the House rules. Do you think that Democrats will be able to use that to get any popular legislation pushed through the House?
I think we'll be able to use it, whether or not it'll be popular legislation, because I think it's hard in the Republican Party to be one of those 5 people that has to ditch out to do the right thing, because I think there's a lot of consequences with the intensity of the extreme MAGA wings of the party. But it will be used this session. Just hold tight, and I think you'll hear more.
Yeah, maybe on the budget stuff. Fascinating. Congressman Mark, we should be hearing music right now, Sean. What's going on? There we go. Okay, Congressman Mark Pocan, thank you so much for being with us again. Con, we really appreciate it.
As always, thank you.
Okay, yep. We'll be back. Is the Supreme Court about to put religion over civil society? Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with you. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Storm is Here, An American Crucible by Luke Mogelson. This is from the introduction. Hoping to stave off an encroaching despair on the morning of January 7th, 2021, I left my hotel in Washington, D.C., taxied to the Lincoln Memorial. I was looking for sanctuary, and an open-air chamber designed to resemble a temple seemed as likely a place to find it as any. I'd been there once or twice, passing between the marble columns. You weren't humbled into silence as much as welcomed. When I arrived this time, however, the monument closed. Squads were pulling up, officers expelling a mob. Many of the people wore red MAGA hats and Trump 2020 shirts. I asked someone what had happened. It seemed that a woman had been posing for pictures with a Gadsden flag, "Don't tread on me," below a hissing snake on a yellow field, when an officer advised that such displays were not allowed. A fracas had ensued, and now the Trump supporters converged at the bottom. The same steps which, in 1963, Martin Luther King delivered his "I Have a Dream" speech, and the crowd then began calling Nazis, Marxists, pigs. Young men in blazers waved their middle fingers. "Christ is king," they chanted. "Aren't we the pussies?" an little bald man asked. "Honestly, we're not overrunning them?" "That's when they start executing people," said a woman in her 30s, glaring hatefully at the police. It occurred to me that some of the officers impassively absorbing this abuse probably had been in the hospital. Less than 24 hours earlier, I had watched Donald Trump tell a similar, though much larger, mob assembled on the far end of the reflecting pool that extended behind us, quote, "If you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore," end quote. Thousands of people, many armed with bats, clubs, whips, and other rudimentary weapons, had proceeded to march up the National Mall. At the Capitol, they had wounded around 180 law enforcement agents, smashed through doors and windows, and frantically hunted for politicians determined to sabotage the peaceful transition of power. Some carried nooses, barked racial epithets, assaulted journalists, and called for the vice president to be lynched. On the Senate floor, I watched Trump supporters ransack desks and steal confidential documents. A bare-chested man in a horned headdress wielding a spear pronounced Mike Pence an effing traitor. Then he led the rioters in prayer. An officer who suffered a stroke after being maced would later die. Now it was not the police, but the Trump supporters who were outraged. Once again, they believed they'd been wronged. Once again, their sense of injury was blistering. The woman with the Gadsden flag was a pastor from Los Angeles. "I know that had to be Antifa," she said of the attack on the Capitol. "I know it did, because everyone here," she gestured at the livid crowd berating the police, "there's such a spirit of community." She began to weep. "How dare they?" she demanded of the officers. "What is wrong with the country? This is not my America. I don't understand." That made two of us. I could think of only one question to ask. Where do we go from here? The pastor wiped her tears. Her suffering was vast. "I will tell you this," she sobbed. "I'll turn the other cheek to what's not right. This is not right. This is not right." The first epidemic I reported on was in West Africa in 2015. Although Ebola was far more deadly and contagious than COVID-19, the international response is inadequate. Liberia's largest slum, a dense warren of crude squatter dwellings in a narrow peninsula that jutted into the Atlantic from downtown Monrovia, was a formidable early hot zone. Below a canopy of rusty sheet, some 80,000 denizens lacked running water, relieved themselves in the cramped gaps between walls, and repurposed detritus bulwark against eroding riverbanks. As the virus wiped out whole families, the Liberian military off the encampments with ramparts and barbed wire. Gunships patrolled the coast. Crime spiked. Panic spread. Soldiers fired on people trying to escape. The community looked doomed. After 10 days, emissaries from the slum prevailed on the government to end the blockade. In exchange, they agreed to implement a suite of precautions, identifying and isolating sick people in their homes, tracking down their recent contacts, and vigilantly monitoring each individual for a period of 3 weeks, the maximum amount of time that the virus was known to incubate before manifesting symptoms. Normally, all this should have been the responsibility of medical professionals and epidemiologists. In the slum, though, the job fell to locals. Against most expectations, within a month, the Ebola outbreak had been contained. Monrovia was not an aberration. In the absence of rescue by the world and their own governments, which were among the poorest on the earth, West Africans remarkably apt at helping one another to survive. Neighborhoods mobilized, healthcare workers volunteered, secluded villages formed ad hoc task forces to oversee sanitation, quarantines, and mandatory social distancing. Education was crucial. Initially, conspiracy theories abounded. Some West Africans embraced a rumor that the virus was a ploy to solicit foreign donor money. Spiritual healers proffered metaphysical explanations for the vagaries of death and illness. In one remote hamlet I visited in Sierra Leone, the chief had been told that somewhere a commercial plane had crashed. For every passenger who died, a villager must have as well. The book, The Storm is Here, by Luke Mogelson.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back to the second hour of our program. My op-ed today that I published over at the Hartmann Report, hartmannreport.com, is titled, "Is SCOTUS About to Put Religion Over Civil Society?" And the answer is apparently yes. This is absolutely fascinating. This is a new case, Groff versus DeJoy. Groff was a guy who worked for the post office. He had a part-time job with the post office, and it was one of these kind of fill-in and emergency kind of jobs. He knew that one of the conditions of his employment was that he may have to work Sundays. He told them he's a fundamentalist Christian and he doesn't want to work Sundays. They tried to work around it for months, but finally, when I think it was the Christmas holiday came, one of the holidays came, and suddenly there was just so much mail, and the post office had a contract with Amazon too. They had to have him work Sundays, or they would have had to hire somebody else, which they didn't want to do. And at that point, he quit and sued the post office for religious discrimination. Now, back years ago, back in 1977, actually, there was a case decided by the United States Supreme Court. It was titled Trans World Airlines versus Hardison. And in that case, let me back up a little. Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, which was passed in 1964, says that employers cannot discriminate based on religion, and that they must provide, quote, reasonable accommodations in the workplace to people based on their religion. But they never defined what a reasonable accommodation is. What does that mean? Does that mean that if you've got a member of your, a person who is an employee of yours who is offended that one of your other employees is wearing, a skirt that's too short, that you should fire that employee with a short skirt? Does it mean that if you've got somebody who's offended that somebody's wearing a Christian cross or a Star of David as a piece of jewelry, that you have to fire them because somebody gets offended by? I mean, what does it mean? So this went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court concluded that companies, in fact, have to make accommodation for their religious employees, but only if the impact on the company, only if the impact of those accommodations is what the Supreme Court referred to as de minimis, which is Latin for trivial. So, yeah, we'll help out to the extent we can, but we're not going to incur expenses, and we're not going to ask other people to fill in for you just because you think that, you want to go to church, 3 days a week or whatever. So this case, Groff versus DeJoy, is an attempt to overturn that Supreme Court decision. And the consensus among Supreme Court watchers, since it took 4 justices just to get the case heard, is that there are probably 6 justices in line for this. This will almost certainly overturn TWA versus Hardison. So what does that mean? Well, it means, as I said, that employers are just going to be subject to all kinds, and the government is the largest employer in the United States. About 20% of our entire GDP is government spending. So this would move us. I mean, I started this article actually talking about the call I got yesterday from Paul in Woodinville, and who said their end game. What are they trying to turn America into? And I said Pakistan. And then I went home yesterday afternoon. I did the research on Pakistan, and sure enough, in Pakistan, you've got women are under the equivalent of Sharia law. You've got they have gutted their equivalent of the IRS to the point that half of the tax collections from wealthy people in that country never get collected. The police enforce blasphemy laws, and and abortion is illegal. It is legal for the life of the mother, but even that's largely not enforced. It's a complete mess in Pakistan. Turns out, I mean, I just said that kind of off the top of my head yesterday, but when I did the research, it was like, holy cow, they are trying to turn America into Pakistan. The average income, 94% of the people in Pakistan less than $10,000 US a year and live in poverty. So, this is where they want to take us, but in particular, they want to take us down this religious road. And so the piece that I put together today, and I hope you have an opportunity to read it, because it's the sort of thing that you'll want to reference in the future. The next time some religious whack job comes at you and says, oh, well, Jefferson thought America was a Christian nation, or Madison thought America was a Christian nation, or George Washington was a good Christian. No, none of them were. Well, Madison was actually a Christian, but he didn't think America was a Christian nation. Jefferson and Washington were not even Christians. Nor was Ben Franklin. I mean, all of them, or Ben Rush, or Gouverneur Morris. I mean, there's a whole list of the founders who had repudiated Christianity. And they put together this country as a secular nation, and they were unambiguous about it. I think probably one of the best stories about that. Ben Franklin, in his autobiography, in Toward the Mystery, he writes, I have found Christian dogma unintelligible. Early in life, I absented myself from Christian assembly. George Washington refused in 1799 when he left office. He refused to, actually he left office before that. He refused to say that he was a Christian. He was confronted with this, and he refused to say it. The Treaty of Tripoli, which George Washington worked out and was signed by John Adams in 1797. As the government of the United States of America is not in any sense founded on the Christian religion. Right, this was signed by the second president of the United States. It was written by the first president of the United States. But I think one of the big ones is this quote from, I've seen it now 3 or 4 times on, flying by on Twitter and social media. It's carved into the wall of the Jefferson Memorial in Washington, D.C. And Thomas Jefferson, this was in a letter to Ben Rush that Thomas Jefferson wrote. He said, I have sworn upon the altar of God eternal hostility against every form of tyranny imposed upon the mind of men. Now, that altar of God, that's like pretty much the only time Jefferson ever referenced God. But it's used by these Bible thumpers to say, see, Jefferson was a good Christian. So I think it's important to understand the context of that. So let me read you the actual letter from which that quote comes. This was a letter to a friend of his, Ben Rush, who was started out as an Orthodox Christian and ended up a deist and a Unitarian. And Jefferson wrote, Dear Sir, I promised you a letter on Christianity, which I have not forgotten. I do not know that it would reconcile the genus irritable vetum, which is Latin for the angry priests, who are all in arms against me. Now, keep in mind, this was 2 months before the election of 1800. He was running for president. He was elected president in 1800. He was running for president, and the Christians were condemning him and telling people not to vote for him. That's what provoked this letter. So anyhow, he writes to Ben Rush. He said, their hostility, he's talking about the priests, he says, their hostility is on too interesting a ground to be softened. The delusion on the clause of the Constitution, he's talking about the First Amendment, which while it secured the freedom of the press, covered also the freedom of religion, has given to the clergy a very favorite hope of obtaining an establishment of a particular form of Christianity through the United States. And as every sect believes its own to be the only true one, everyone perhaps hoped for his own, but especially the Episcopalians and the Congregationalists. The returning good sense of our country, and what he's talking about is the probability that he's going to be elected president, because it was looking that way. He says, the returning good sense of our country threatens abortion to their hopes. And the preachers believe that any portion of power confided to me, such as being elected president, will be exerted in opposition to their schemes. And they believe rightly, for I have sworn upon the altar of God eternal hostility against every form of tyranny over the mind of man. But this is all they have to fear from me, and enough, too, in their opinion. End of quote. So there you have it. You know, the next time somebody tries to tell you that America is a Christian nation, that it was founded on Christian principles, that the founders were Christian, well, some of them were, but they were all, even the Christians among them, like James Madison, his first veto was to give federal money to a church to feed hungry poor people. And he said, no, this is a government function, and we do not want to establish the precedent of faith-based initiatives. We do not, it would be unconstitutional. It's a violation of our principles to give any government money to any church whatsoever for any purpose. And of course, that's all been blown up. George W. Bush's faith-based initiatives, and now we've got, you know, the state of Arizona. Every child in Arizona can go to a religious school with state money, you know, on and on and on like this. I mean, this is just, it's ahistoric. It's not true. You know, this assertion that the founders would have wanted government money going to churches. It's wrong. And frankly, it violates the principles on which this country was founded. We'll be right back. I want to get into the snitching on teachers. This is amazing.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Republicans have a whole little scheme here. Plus, I'll be picking up your phone calls. Stick around. 16 minutes past the hour. And welcome back. Kathy in Lomita, California. Hey, Kathy, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I love your show, and I love all your beginnings and everything. And the reason why I'm calling is because I was really upset of a report that they had on MSNBC of how Netanyahu is taking over the country and forcing people on the left bank to move out of their territory, and it's causing a lot of chaos.
Yep.
Yeah, and my whole thing is, and this country is supporting this,
mm-hmm.
or people of this country are supporting this.
Yeah. I think the biggest problem is that Netanyahu is trying to change the rules around the Supreme Court in Israel. I haven't.
From what I understand, that he totally not got rid of it, but he took away the power of the Supreme Court just so he could do this.
Yeah, here we pack the court. There they changed the rules for the court. No,
or they get rid of them. Number two, and it's So basically, it's really scary that this is happening all around the world, and people are not realizing, and they're going along and being complicit about this. And it's like, it should be raising an alarm on people of what's really going on. And it's not only in the United States, but it's all over the place.
I think that's probably the most important point here, Kathy, which is that the assault on democratic principles, on separation of powers, on the right of people to vote, on the idea of a pluralistic democracy is not unique to any one country. It's certainly happening here in the United States. It's certainly happening in Israel. Hungary is already way down that road. I would say that Hungary is a semi-fascist state now, the same for Turkey, who are NATO allies.
It's so many,
Right.
so many. And then you have China that is controlled.
Yeah.
Totally controlled.
Yeah,
how many children they could have, if they have more than children, what do they do with them? Do they kill them, or do they get rid of them, or what's going on here?
Well, China has ended their one-child policy. Actually, they're now trying to encourage people to have children because they're concerned that they're going to end up with this demographic bulge where you're going to have a lot of people retiring and not enough people to take care of them, not enough young people to care for them. They're freaking out about this in a couple of countries. There's several countries that are seeing their populations actually decline right now, and they tend to be, the countries. Yeah, well, this is what happens as countries get wealthier. Women choose not to have as many babies. It's the best population control in the world is creating a middle class, and China's middle class is now larger than the population of the entire United States. There's about 400 million people in China's middle class. We only have 340 million people here, period. And our middle class is only 45% of us right now. So China's middle class is twice the size of our middle class. And
people are falling. And you know what? That people are slipping and falling out of the middle class, and they're trying to hold on for dear life because they're coming up with all these different policies to drop them below the economy level.
Yeah, we had a $50 trillion transfer of wealth from the beginning of the Reagan administration to today, out of the pockets of the bottom 90%, into the money bins of the top 1%. Kathy, I got to run, but thank you for the call. Fascinating stuff. 20 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. Wondering what this new legislative session, the next 2 years, are going to bring us with Republicans in charge of the House of Representatives? Well, Congressman Bill Pascrell put together a list that kind of summarizes what we should expect. 100% of the Republicans in the House of Representatives voted against cheaper for Americans, voted against cheaper insulin for Americans, voted against cheaper prescription drug prices, 100% voted against child tax credits, 100% voted against stimulus checks, 100% voted against the Voting Rights Act. They voted 100% voted against ending gerrymandering. They voted 100% against ending climate change. 100% voted against prosecuting rich tax cheats. 100% voted against saving Roe v. Wade. 99% voted against banning assault weapons, terrorism. The list goes on. I've got an entire video all about the entire list over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. And welcome back. So let's see here. Iowa Republicans are working on a new way to stop vulnerable kids in public schools, is the headline by Marissa Higlins over at dailycoast.com. Republicans, she writes, know their tried and true method of getting kids to the polls is to scare them into voting. And, this is true. Democrats come out and say, hey, vote for us because we're going to build new schools, we're going to build new highways, we're going to get broadband into people in rural areas, we're going to expand we're going to get more people registered to vote and participating in our democracy, we're going to expand Medicare, we're going to expand Social Security, we're going to make life better for Americans. Republicans get people to vote by saying, oh my God, look out, they're coming for your school, they're coming for your kids, communism, it's socialism, it's gay people, it's black people, oh my God, hair on fire. And here we go. This is a brand new one. It's just amazing. As reported by the Iowa Starting Line, which is a Iowa newspaper or blog site, the Skylar Wheeler, who is the chair of the House Education Committee in the House of Representatives for Iowa, has introduced House Bill 112 into the Iowa legislature, which would create a system whereby parents, students, or right-wing cranks could report violations of their anti-CRT, critical race theory law, that is already on the books. The Iowa legislature has already passed a law saying it is illegal for a teacher in Iowa to teach critical race theory. Well, as you probably know, if you've ever listened to this program, critical race theory is something that is taught in college, in law school. There are a few other colleges that are not law schools now that have started adopting courses on critical race. And it's a deep dive, it's a deep dive and historical analysis of how structural racism has impacted, race. And there's not a single elementary school in America that is teaching critical race theory. But, the right-wingers have just, so anyhow, they put this into law. So basically what they mean now, they've reinvented critical race theory to mean any discussion of the history of violence against black people by white people in the country, basically. And so now any public school teacher who remotely touches on race or systems of oppression can be fired, can be fined, or, the real goal of this law is scared into silence. The House Bill 112 would allow folks to report any suspected violation of a public school teacher covering topics including racism, diversity, inclusion, and sexism. People who want to complain the colleges that have teacher education courses that teach teachers how to become teachers are seeing a drop in enrollment. Why? Because you've got an entire movement, the Republican Party, the conservative movement, that basically doesn't believe in public education. Ever since Brown v. Board in 1954, ever since the Supreme Court said public schools have to be integrated, there has been this conservative backlash to that, trying to move kids out of public schools and into segregated private schools, particularly religious private schools, but also just plain old good old-fashioned right-wing private schools. And Betsy DeVos, as our education secretary under Trump, was one of the leaders of this movement, continues to, among others. This is just so wrong. Do you have kids in school? Are you concerned about this? Are grandkids in school? I have grandkids. My oldest grandchild is going into kindergarten this year. What does this mean to you? We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
I'll pick up your phone calls on the other side of this break. Stay with us. It was first published in 1993. This is from Chapter 1, titled Detoxing. Today's revolutionary need is to detox ourselves from the old, stereotyped political formulas from 20 or 30 years ago, without which we cannot deal with neocolonialism. A while ago, I was watching a Malcolm X Day program, and the main speaker ended by militantly reciting Malcolm X's famous phrase, "the ballot or the bullet." Haven't you caught this thing? X, most fresh of all thinkers, is being turned into the equivalent of Lenin or Mao's corpse on ceremonial display. For when X threw down that slogan a generation ago, it was then timely and on point. Black people were struggling for freedom against colonial conditions, and most had neither the ballot nor the bullet. The militant question was which would be picked up. Now the black nation is struggling for its life against neo-colonial conditions. And new African people have lots of ballots and lots of bullets. Everywhere you have African city governments, African officials and African executives, African soldiers, African shooters, and African posses. You might say that the black nation is too much ballots and bullets, but not radical enough truths, perhaps. Under colonialism, the oppressed were largely kept disarmed. Now it's all reversed. Imperialism and neo-colonial system races not to disarm, we're hopeless in this age, but to arm the oppressed in its own way, whether it's posses or paratroopers, children included, naturally. Feminists say women should get self-defense. Does that threaten imperialism? Then why is Smith & Wesson making the Ladysmith, a .38 subnose specially sized for women? Is the government of white men doing anything to stop women from owning handguns? The ranks of white women who've done so are over 50 climbing? Be real. In the Ivory Coast and Somalia, men and boys in rags and bare feet have AK-47s and grenades. In New York and Los Angeles, kids too young for learner's permits got Raven 258 or a Deuce, or maybe even a Tech-9. What's the firepower of the old Black Liberation Army compared to the Crips in Compton or the Jamaica posses just in Flatbush? Get the Uzi is successful slang because it plays off reality we all know. More than a few new African children say personally they got to be more afraid of black people than white people. So how useful is the liberal left habit of playing low to the crowd with old anti-colonial rhetoric? It used to be that dissing the white man was a crime or close to it, dangerous for sure, like life-threatening if a black man or woman did it. Now it's so tame that Fox or ABC give it to us as a sitcom. There's even some college courses on how to diss the white man. He may not like it, but who cares? Imperialism doesn't care, that's for sure. Even white women are doing it now as a substitute for doing anything real. It's like running in place. As Rodney, the Guyanese revolutionary scholar, pointed out, it's counterproductive to solve the neo-colonial situation, or counterproductive to solving the neo-colonial situation. Revs still cling to the old ideas and ways, in part because we don't want to admit how ignorant we are now. This runs deeper, though. Anti-colonial politics are the culmination of 400 years of our struggle. They are the products of the best minds we had, of destroying old societies, of oppressed people challenging the world in uprisings, pushing farther and farther. These old views are already fully developed, well honed. More than that, the old anti-colonial politics are developed in the most profound sense, in having been widely diffused and taken hold of by the oppressed, put to use already. So when Revs talk that talk, walk that old walk, it's not only familiar but reassuring and to a certain degree popular. We all take for granted now that the anti-colonial consciousness and changes. It's become the normal. That's what's our due. A few years ago, Nelson Mandela was the most famous terrorist POW in the world. In 1990, when he made his triumphant visit here, he was not only greeted by massive crowds of well-wishers, but schools and churches throughout the black nation held special programs to honor him. City governments and the U.S. Congress itself had to organize welcomes for him. Like it or not, white men had to smile and applaud him. And last year, by any means necessary T-shirts with Malcolm's picture on them were more common in many streets than Budweiser T-shirts. And you can't take it to mean anything extreme or radical. The old anti-colonial awareness has already been generalized widely, absorbed by people and society itself into daily life. So let's break that down. When a tiny Klan faction based in North Carolina to the U.S. Capitol from a rally on Labor Day weekend 1990, it took over 2,000 cops in riot gear to hold the angry crowds back. The D.C. New African community was outraged that any Klan dared to march in their city, which is 70% black, on their territory. Ephi Berry, then wife of the then mayor, Marion Berry, came out and brought her 10-year-old son. "I'm overwhelmed," she said. The book is Night Vision, Illuminating War and Class of the Neocolonial Terrain by Butch Lee and Red Rover, first published in 1993. share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on Sirius XM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. So Congressman Joe Walsh was on CNN the other day talking about the liberal media bias, and he's a former Republican. I mean, I think they actually believe this stuff, and I don't know how they can believe it when they know. I mean, Joe Walsh, of all people, would that there are 1,500 more or less right-wing radio stations in America and a handful of progressive radio stations. For example, Twitter's own internal study found that in 6 out of 7 nations, the exception being Germany, tweets from right-wing politicians received more amplification from the algorithm than those from the left. And right-leaning news organizations were more amplified than those on the left. That's a quote from their study. The, Media Matters did a study. 8.8% of Sunday show guests are liberal. 48.5% tilt to the right. Tell me about this again. There's a whole video about this over at ThomHartmann.com. Check it out. And welcome back. 35 minutes past the hour. Picking up your calls. Dave in Silicon, Washington. Hey, Dave, what's up?
Hey, that's me. Hey, Tom, just want to thank you for being a oasis of knowledge, oasis of enlightenment in a vast wasteland of corporate media desert. Hey, I want to thank you for that. Hey, my question. A while back, we were hearing a lot about invoking the 14th Amendment that applies. Should I get into that? Or
with regard to the debt ceiling you're talking about?
No, not the debt ceiling. No, this is any public officer who has taken an oath.
Oh, Article 3.
The Constitution.
Yeah,
Article 3, yes.
Yeah, Article 4 is about the debt shall not be challenged. Article 3 says that if you engage in sedition, treason, or attempt to overthrow the government, you cannot hold public office.
That's the one. So, like ex-President Trump, Marjorie Taylor Greene, and the other maggots, they should not even be allowed to be on ballot.
I agree.
What happened there? Why aren't we making more noise about this?
I completely agree. There have been 2 court cases around this. They both involved locals. In one case, a judge ruled that a local official who was involved in, I believe, in January 6th, who was physically there at the attack, could not run for public office because of Article 3 of the Amendment. In another case, a judge ruled, and the other case was the Marjorie Taylor Greene case. It was in Georgia. And there was a challenge to her being on the primary ballot. And this was back, last August, I think, of last year. And the judge there ruled that she's a sitting member of Congress, that what she did had not been adjudicated to be sedition. Now, keep in mind, she had been arrested by the FBI. That she had not been adjudicated to have committed sedition, and therefore the 14th Amendment did not apply, that you really had to have a conviction in a court of law. So, there's a pretty high standard here, Dave, but, at the level of emotion isn't quite the right word, but, of moral conscience, of intent of the law, of the Constitution, I think it's very clear that, of the 147, I believe, or 153 members of the it might be 147 in the House and then 153, include the senators. I don't recall the exact numbers, but it's in that neighborhood, of the Republicans who voted to not make Joe Biden president, that probably a couple of dozen of them were actively involved. It certainly looks like Scott Perry was. The FBI had enough evidence that they were able to get a search warrant from a judge indicating that there was probable cause that he had committed a crime, and seize his cell phone, and now he's battling that because there's the speech and debate clause in the Constitution that says members of Congress are immune from being arrested while they are doing the business of Congress. And, it was originally designed, it's in there, the speech and debate clause is in there so that members could speak their minds and not be held to account for it. It mostly immunizes them from libel and slander laws. But in any case, Scott Perry is using that to say that they can't look at his phone. So they've got his phone, but so far they have not been able to look at it. They're waiting for it to be adjudicated. I have a feeling that if Scott Perry goes down in flames on this, that will be the beginning of dominoes falling. On the other hand, I have a feeling that my sense of it is that if he succeeds, if the speech and debate clause prevails, That will immunize people who have been alleged to have been leading tours of seditionists in the days before the attack. Some of the leading candidates that are speculated about are, Green and Boebert and others. And clearly we know that apparently the Proud Boys, at the very least, had inside information. They knew which windows did not have bulletproof glass and could be broken. So, I think it's a big deal, Dave, and I'm not holding my breath, but I haven't given up yet. So stick around. Stay tuned, as they say in the radio business. Dave, thanks for the call. Paul in Ambler, Pennsylvania. Hey, Paul, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I'd like to address the whole issue of the debt ceiling. I think that a lot of people's nerves are really being racked, especially by what's going on, national network news and just about every other outlet. I think people need to recall that the government has been shut down in the past, and they still operated the airports with the air traffic controllers and the TSA. They were declared essential workers, and they worked without a paycheck, along with a lot of other federal employees who didn't get paid, but by demand of the executive branch, forced them to go to work.
Right.
Also,
but that was none of those were defaults. What the Republicans are threatening a whole brand new thing here, Paul. They're not just threatening to shut down the government, to stop payments to those folks. That's what's going on now. We're in that territory right now. What they're threatening is default.
That's the next step, right? That's the next step. But still, even under a default, the government can still operate. The consequences of the default would be new territory. I absolutely agree with that.
It's a nuclear bomb.
I'm trying to get people to just calm down, saying even if they do that, they can still have the government operate because of the essential worker clause. That's something that things will still be good, and especially with Social Security. I mean, I'm no spring chicken. I'm 66, so I'm collecting it. But I know that they have a $2.8 trillion surplus, and it's completely off budget. As long as these Social Security employees are declared essential workers, and my understanding is the Republicans, the leadership in Biden aren't going to touch that.
No, that's not the case. Make sure Social Security payments can be delayed, will be delayed. Even though Social Security has a surplus, Al Gore's lockbox that he lobbied for never happened. So the Social Security funds are considered part of the general fund, and therefore they would not be able to be spent.
Well, that's not my understanding. It's considered off budget. I haven't seen anything.
I'm pretty sure that they delayed
that
payments to Social Security the time before last that they did this.
No, I'm telling you, they've never missed a payment.
Yeah.
Never.
Well, okay,
not a
maybe
penny,
I'm wrong on
not
that.
a dollar.
Maybe I'm wrong on that. But I think that
the whole debt limit thing.
Yeah, I do think that we need to be very, very concerned about this, though, because if the full faith and credit of the United States is breached, if we default on our debt, if we don't make bond payments, that will be huge. I mean, when Greece did that, it took down their government. Well,
the whole world uses the U.S. dollar as its reserve. They'll abandon it.
That's right.
It's not just a financial thing. It's a political sovereignty of the United States.
That's right. It'll be a major disaster.
Kiss it goodbye.
Yeah, exactly.
Kiss it goodbye.
Exactly. So I think that, you're saying don't be so concerned about it. I'm saying we should be hysterical about it. Well, not hysterical, but you get my point. I mean, we should be very concerned.
I'm walking and having a nervous breakdown at the same time.
I get it, Paul. I get it.
All right, have a good day.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Paul. Good talking to you. Ed in Chicago. Hey, Ed, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, you were just talking about the Republicans in Iowa scaring people to get them to vote, motivate them to vote, because they know fear is the strongest motivating factor in people. And I'll tell you, I will forever believe that if the Democratic Party had been openly honest about scaring the American people about what the Republicans were openly talking about with the Social Security before these past midterms, that we would have held the House.
Yeah, I agree.
But the reason I'm calling is about Mark Pocan's article in The Guardian. Excellent article. And what I wanted to ask him, and maybe if you know this, I would think that by now the Democratic Party in the House and the Senate would have like a media distribution center where that article in The Guardian about Mark Pocan should appear on every Democratic representative's House member. Everybody should know about it and should have access to it.
Yeah.
I guess I'm saying I would think that they would have a group of people whose sole job was to go through different media, sources, and when they find something that the Democratic Party can use, to just hit a button on a keyboard and send that out to every Democratic representative and senator. An impression I'm getting is that doesn't happen.
Yeah,
and I'm
right.
wondering, am I wrong on that? Or
no, you're right. First of all, this would have to be done by a separate organization, specifically the DNC, much like the RNC does it. Although there's multiple organizations that are pushing out right-wing talking points that are affiliated, with the Republican Party. There's the Republican Study Group, for example, which is, tightly merged with the cokehead Freedom Caucus in the House, the Republicans in the House, who are all taking money from the Koch network, and there's nothing like that on the Democratic side, and we talked about this briefly with Pocan, and there should be.
I just think with today's technology, that shouldn't be that difficult a thing to do.
I agree, and I would like to also see the Democratic Party basically create their very own in-house version of the Lincoln Project and start producing, low-budget videos. These are not these are not hugely expensive, and you don't have to buy television time to run them. You put them into social media where they go viral. I mean, Trump won the election in 2016 in large part because of Facebook. We could do the same thing. Ed, thank you. Keep thinking. Be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Stay with us. More of your calls right after this. Just check the Social Security Administration's website, and they note that in the event of a government shutdown, Social Security checks will be delayed or missed, which is pretty bizarre. Susan in Seattle. Hey, Susan, thanks for listening to KBCS. What's on your mind today?
Oh, great, thanks. I'm calling about the early days of the founding of the country and the religious freedom idea. And just, by the way, a little preface, I always started out life as a deist, as a universalist, and my mother switched us over, leaving what the paternal side did, to high Anglicanism, which freaked out my universalist family, who thought it was horrible, that we were genuflecting and what have you. I'm just calling to say that I recently learned about Haim Solomon of Philadelphia and New York, who was an important funder of the Revolutionary War.
And was Jewish.
And yeah, it was Jewish. And there were a number of Jews who had come here for seeking religious freedom. And there was an important letter from the congregation in Providence, I believe, that to George Washington, and he went and visited him. And they demanded religious freedom for what their contribution. And that is just never taught. And I thought it was really important and interesting. Like I said, I just learned about it.
Yeah.
That's all. I just wanted to add that.
That's a good point. I remember reading about that years ago. It's Haim, right? H-A-I-M?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Haim.
I think so. Or maybe H-A-Y-M or something. And Solomon, I think.
Yeah, Solomon, yeah. I knew that. I should have included that in my article yesterday, although the article is like 4,000 words. It's like a chapter of a book, It's really, well, actually, it is a chapter of a book. I pulled that, I wrote the Jefferson part of it, all the founders part of it months ago and put it into The Hidden History of American Democracy as the next book that will be coming out this summer.
Can you add? You should add something on this part. I thought this was fascinating.
I should. I need to go check that out. Thank you for the reminder, Susan. I appreciate it.
Sure.
Thank
Have
you.
a good day. Take
you
care.
Too. Randy in Ottawa, Iowa. Hey, Randy, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom.
Hey.
How are you today?
I'm well. How are you?
I want to touch on something that's local here that I've noticed in the last few days, and then move on to something else I'd like to address with you.
Well, we got a minute and 4 seconds.
Huh?
We have a minute and 2 seconds. So go
okay,
for it.
cool. I'll just get to it, and we'll deal with it. I'll listen off the air. I've seen a White Lives Matter with 333 that's been popping up painted on some guy's garage door. And then I saw the 333, which popped up at another site here in town. And since before the last election, a year or so before the last election, these signs started popping up, "Pray Country." Mm-hmm. And somehow or another, these things are working together in this Trump world of
sounds like QAnon stuff.
Well, self-imposed ignorance. It's people who think that religion in school and religion in government are okay.
Right.
I just wanted to touch on that. Oh, and this is the state. Iowa is the third state to pass the publicly funded madrasas at $7,000 and something per student. They can take to go to a religious school.
Wow.
So I'll have to get back with you. I got to talk to you about that Biden and 16% advantage that you have.
Sounds like a plan.
Some other time.
Thank you, Randy. Thanks for the call. 333. I've got to go Google that. We'll be right back. Help support Progressive Radio. If you're listening to us on a commercial station, call their advertisers and let them know you're listening. If you're listening to us on Pacifica, one of our many nonprofit stations, please support them with fundraising drives. Thanks for supporting Progressive Talk Radio and tag you're it. There was a time in America where a single wage earner could support a middle-class lifestyle, and that meant being able to buy a 3-bedroom house, have a couple of cars if necessary, take an annual vacation, occasionally maybe even go overseas, send your kids to college. Having roof repairs or major, problems with your home didn't throw you into bankruptcy, or getting sick didn't do that. That was America throughout the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, and even the early 90s. But then Reaganism bit hard. It's really particularly been biting us in the last couple of decades. And now, in order to have that middle-class lifestyle, you need to have 2 workers, and you need to have an income of typically well over $100,000 a year in order to have that kind of security. I've got a whole rant about this with a lot more details over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. "51 minutes past the hour, picking up your calls. Alan in New York, New York. Hey, Alan, what's on your mind today?
Tom, good afternoon. How are you?
I'm well. What's up?
Several years ago, the New York Times ran an editorial criticizing Hungary for its anti-Semitic stance. Mm-hmm. It's pretty much institutionalized at that point.
Yep.
Yet Hungary supports Israel worldwide politically. It also does business in Israel, and it has an embassy in Israel. And recently I read online that Netanyahu and Hungary's prime minister, the so-called neo-fascist Viktor Orbán, are very close friends. Yet I have never heard anybody in the media, and I don't listen to everybody, obviously, report all this. And I'm wondering why. Did you know anything about it?
I know that, Orbán, here's a little bit of irony, Alan. George Soros, who is the quote, the kind of international Jew, and I put that in scare quotes, that right. Orbán loves to trash and regularly trashes. He was Hungarian. George Soros was born in Hungary. He's now an American. George Soros paid for Viktor Orbán to go to college.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And he's got a fund in Hungary for Hungarian kids, in memory of his growing up in Hungary, to pay for them to go to college. And Viktor Orbán was one of the kids who went through that program, 2 decades ago. But I didn't know that Orbán knew Netanyahu. I don't know anything about that. I do know that Orbán, peddles in anti-Semitism, as does right. his party. The Fidesz party is big on hate anybody who's not, white, straight Christian. But that's news to me.
But do you find it strange that this hypocrisy goes unreported?
No, I think that fascists like fascists, and I think that fascism trumps religion.
But I'm saying that, again, I don't cover everything, but even on the left, I don't see this being reported, being even mentioned.
Yeah.
And it's on the web.
Where did you learn this, Alan? Where did you see it?
Online. I forget the name of the website, but all you need to do is Google it,
Well,
I guess.
just because something's on the internet doesn't mean it's true.
Okay.
I mean,
but
if you'd said the New York
the
Times
reason
or the Guardian, I'd take it a little more seriously.
Because when, for example, when Israel went into Gaza, not this time, but the previous time, the European Union criticized it, except Hungary. Hungary withdrew from any criticism at all.
Yeah.
So that got me to thinking, and I did a little deeper probing, and this is what I came up to. But you're right, it's not necessarily accurate.
Well, and Orban might hate Muslims more than he hates Jews. There's a
He might hate
hierarchy
who?
of hatred here. I don't know, Alan, but it's an interesting question. Thank you for calling and raising it. That's fascinating. Mick in Fort Madison, Iowa. Hey, Mick, what's on your mind today?
Oh, hi, Tom. Earlier you were talking about the attack on education in Iowa. I wanted to add a point that Iowa just passed a law last week signed by the governor that's going to give $7,900 per student to private and parochial schools.
Wow.
Public taxpayer money is going to go in, and it's already a done deal. They
to
passed
religious
it.
schools.
A 10-hour debate over 2 days. She signed it that night.
Yeah.
About 20,000 students go into parochial schools in Iowa, so you can do the math and see how many hundreds of millions that's going to take out of the Iowa budget.
Right. Is Kim Reynolds your governor? Am I remembering right?
That's correct, Kim Reynolds.
Yeah. Wow. This is what Doug Ducey did in Arizona too, and I'm just guessing that this is, I don't know if it's an ALEC approved piece of legislation, but it's the kind of stuff that's spreading all across the country. There is a war on public education. It's that simple.
It is definitely a war on education in Iowa, for sure, on public education.
Yep. Mick, thanks for the call. Neil in Greenville, South Carolina. Hey, Neil, I'm sorry, I only have a minute here. You got a quick one?
Tom, yes, I want to go back to the murder that took place in Memphis.
Mm-hmm.
Until such time as we completely dismantle policing, because what these policemen are doing is they're operating in a system as it was designed.
Mm-hmm.
It was never designed to protect. It was never designed to care for. It was designed to capture black people.
At least police departments in cities, yes, absolutely. I mean, there's still Andy of Mayberry policing going on in small towns, but I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah. If we go back to slavery. And the other thing I want to go to is this, and I'll be quick, is this whole idea of CRT. And we're talking about education. What America has an immunity to is telling the truth.
Yeah.
So it's not that they don't want to know black history. They just don't want to tell the truth.
Yeah, the inconvenient truths. Because yes, I agree.
The capitalism, and the capitalism as we apply it has no place for it because it's all based on marketing.
There you go. Neil, thank you. Thank you very much. By the way, they didn't find any documents at Biden's beach house. They searched his house. So there you go.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com. It was first published in 1993. This is from Chapter 1, titled Detoxing. Today's revolutionary need is to detox ourselves from the old stereotyped political formulas from 20 years ago, without which we cannot deal with neocolonialism. A while ago, I was watching a Malcolm X Day program, and the main speaker ended by militantly reciting Malcolm X's phrase, "the ballot or the bullet." Haven't you thought the same thing? X, most fresh of all thinkers, is being turned into the equivalent of Lenin or Mao's corpse on ceremonial display. For when X threw down that slogan a generation ago, it was then timely and on point. Black people were struggling for freedom against colonial conditions, and most had neither the ballot nor the bullet. The militant question was which would be picked up. Now, the nation struggling for its life against neo-colonial conditions. And new African people have lots of ballots and lots of bullets. Everywhere you have African city governments, African officials and African executives, African soldiers, African shooters, and African posses. You might say that the black nation is dying from too much ballots and bullets, but not enough truths, perhaps. Under colonialism, the oppressed were largely kept disarmed. Now it's all reversed. Imperialism as a neo-colonial system races not to disarm, which is hopeless and sage, but to arm the oppressed in its own way, whether it's posses or paratroopers, children included, naturally. Feminists say women should get self-defense. Does that threaten imperialism? Then why is Smith & Wesson make Ladysmith, a .38 subnose specially sized for women? Is white men doing anything to stop women from owning handguns? The ranks of white women who've done so are over 15 million and climbing. Be real. In the Ivory Coast and Somalia, men and boys in rags and bare feet have AK-47s and grenades. In New York and Los Angeles, kids too young for learner's permits, a Raven 238 or a Deuce, or maybe even a Tech 9. What's the of the old Black Liberation Army compared to the Compton or the Jamaica posses just in Flatbush? Get the Uzi is successful slang because it plays off reality we all know. More than a few new African children say personally they got to be more afraid of black people than white people. So how useful is the liberal left habit of playing low to the crowd with old anti-colonial rhetoric? It used to be that dissing the white man was a crime or close to it, dangerous for sure, like life-threatening if a black man or woman did it. So tame that Fox or ABC give it to us as a sitcom. There's even some college courses on how to diss the white man. He may not like it, but who cares? Imperialism doesn't care for sure. Even white women are doing it now as a substitute for doing anything real. It's like running in place. As Rodney, the Guyanese revolutionary scholar, pointed out, it's counterproductive to solve the neo-colonial situation, or counterproductive to solving the neo-colonial situation. Revs still cling to the old ideas and ways, in part because we don't want to admit how ignorant we are now. This runs deeper, though. Anti-colonial politics are the culmination of 400 years of our struggle. They are the products of the best minds we had, of destroying old societies, of oppressed people challenging the world in uprisings, pushing farther and farther. These old views are already full. More than that, the old anti-colonial politics are developed in the most profound sense in having been widely diffused and taken hold of by the oppressed, put to use already. So when Revs talk about that old talk, walk that walk, it's not only familiar, but reassuring and to a certain degree popular. We all take for granted now that the anti-colonial consciousness and changes. It's become the normal. That's what's our due. A few years ago, Nelson Mandela was the most famous terrorist POW in the world. In 1990, when he made his triumphant visit here, he was not only greeted by massive crowds of well-wishers, but schools and churches throughout the black nation held special programs to honor him. City governments and the U.S. Congress itself had to organize welcomes for him. Like it or not, white men had to smile and applaud him. And last year, by any means necessary T-shirts with Malcolm's picture on them were more common in many streets than Budweiser T-shirts. And you can't take it to mean anything extreme or radical. The old anti-colonial awareness has already been generalized widely, absorbed by people and society itself into daily life. So let's break that down. When a Taliban faction based in North Carolina to the U.S. Capitol from a rally on Labor Day weekend in 1990, it took over 2,000 cops in riot gear to hold the angry crowds back. The D.C. New African community was outraged that any Klan dared to march in their city, which is 70% black, on their territory. Ephi Berry, the then wife of the then mayor, Marion Berry, came out and brought her 10-year-old son. "I'm overwhelmed," she said. The book is Night Vision, Illuminating War and Class of the Neil Terrain by Butch Lee and Red Rover, first published in 1993.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back to the third hour of our program. On the line with us is the Dean of Radio, Dean Obeidallah. His show runs 6 to 9 p.m. weekdays right here on Sirius XM Progress, channel 127. He's a columnist with CNN.com, a contributor with the New Republic. Deanofradio.com is his website, and more importantly, DeanObeidallah.substack.com is his newsletter, which is just brilliant. I strongly recommend that you check it out. Dean, welcome back to the program.
Thank you very much. You had me on a few weeks ago, and you recommended me, and a lot of your listeners signed up for it. So I really appreciate it. Welcome, and everyone else, welcome aboard. It's free, and I write it a couple of times a week. So aboard.
And it is worth the trouble. It really, worth the effort to go find it and track it down. So there's two stories that you have written this week, one over at MSNBC and the other on your Substack newsletter. Let's start with your Substack newsletter. Kevin McCarthy going after Representative Ilhan Omar. This is cuts right to the bone for you as a Muslim American. Tell us about Kevin McCarthy's attacks on Omar, where they originated, and why he's doing this in your...
Right, absolutely, because Congresswoman Omar she's black, she's Muslim, she's an immigrant, and she's a strong woman. And all of that rolled into one is what the MAGA base hates. And Congresswoman Omar, to remind people, was one of Donald Trump's favorite punching bags. In fact, at a rally despicably in 2019, his supporters chanted, "Send her back," as in send a black woman back to Africa because they don't like her because she dared to speak out against Donald Trump. So you've got that. Plus, before that, you had a history for the years after 9/11, but especially from 2012 on, of anti-Muslim bigotry being weaponized in the GOP base, really bringing people out on the right to come out and say, yeah, we hate Muslims, to the point where Donald Trump took it to new lows when he called for a complete and total Muslims coming to this country during the 2016 campaign. So what McCarthy, he's lived through that. He sees that. He understands a man who's really not liked by anyone. I have to be honest, not even the GOP likes him. He's a transactional, he is dressed up as a congressman. That's McCarthy. All he is. Yeah, and they know that. McCarthy's desperate to MAGA people to like him. So what's he going to do? Serve up some bigotry, some white nationalism, anti-Muslim bigotry rolled into one with Congressman Omar and get her off for committee. But the struggle for him is that it takes a full vote of the House. And I had our mutual friend, Congressman Pocan, on last night, who said that he doesn't have the votes. So that's why it's kind of quiet right now, because he's learned from his own GOP caucus. There are members who are like, no, we're not going to vote to remove her from our committee. So he's struggling with trying to get the base on board with removing her to make him more popular with the broader Republican base.
Which I think speaks to a larger issue here, which is that, when Democrats are reaching out to their voters, they tell people what they're going to do for them. How government is typically envisioned by people all around the world. We're going to provide you with good schools. We're going to help you get to college. We're going to provide you with health care. We're going to make sure that, your home isn't taken away by scam artists. We're going to control the banksters. We're going to, regulate industry in America. We're going to make sure that the minimum wage gets raised. We're going to help you have the right to unionize. When Republicans reach out to their voters, they don't tell them what to do for them. I mean, Republican voters in the United States are the most crapped upon people in the country. That you've got massive poverty across the red states. You've got the highest gun death rates in the red states. You've got, the highest levels of illiteracy in the red states. What the Republicans do is they go off on here's who you have to eat, right?
Right. That's it.
And all they have to sell is hate, because really all they want to do is give tax breaks to billionaires and corporate friends. How do we message that? That's clearly the reason why McCarthy, or part of the reason why McCarthy's going after Omar.
Here's the problem, Tom. As Democrats, we're not just fighting Republicans. We're fighting against the corporate media's dishonest narratives. How many times have you seen stories about GOP extremism and they both sides it?
Yeah.
Look, the Democrats are extremists. We want Medicare for all. We want federal-funded pre-K. That's our idea of extremism. On the right, their extremism is white national, it's election denialism, and it's supporting the January 6th terrorist attack, which now nearly 60% of Republicans per a CBS poll view not as terrorism, but as an act defending freedom. Again, we have a fascist movement against this where, Tom, the Democratic president did what Trump did, and 60% of Democrats said that attack was defending freedom. The GOP would be calling us every name in the book, and fascism will be the right name. But when the reverse happens, you don't see anyone, very few in the media, besides us perhaps, Joy Reid, my buddy, and a few others, what they are, and it's not hyperbolic. It is a white nationalist fascist movement. They've embraced violence, and it is growing. And as we get to 2024, this presidential cycle, because it's going to be a competitive primary, expect Trump and others to spew bigotry and hate again and rile up violence to get the base animated, and violence against us Democrats. That's what they're going to be doing. So hang on. It's going to be scary because Trump's back involved and it's a competitive primary.
Yeah, which brings us to the second article of yours that I read this week that I thought, whoa, I got to talk to Dean about this. This you published over at MSNBC.com. It's titled, Opinion Polls Reveal the Real Reason Ron DeSantis is Fighting the Teaching of Black History. What is that real reason?
It's absolutely, if you track it, and DeSantis knows the base, like Trump. In the last 20 years, you've seen an increasing hostility among the GOP base to teaching any Black history, not advanced placement Black history, any Black history, folks. That's what's going on in the GOP. And I'm citing there was a poll from 2000. They asked Democrats and Republicans, is too much Black history being taught in school? The answer was almost the same. Almost no one said there was too much. Flash forward 2018, you're at 40% of Republicans saying too much Black history is being taught. That's 5 years ago. You go forward now, easily you get to a majority of Republicans saying, I don't want any Black history. That's critical race theory. Banning that is an 80% support among the GOP, because to them, critical race theory is teaching about not just history of racism, but how it plays today's world. And they feel uncomfortable about it. And there's a flip side, Tom, that I talk about digging even deeper. If you look at the GOP base in the last 20 years, they've went from saying racism against Black people is the worst racism in America to a poll last year of Trump supporters, 75% of Trump supporters. Are you ready for this, folks? 75% of Trump supporters think white people are just as big of a victim of racism as people of color. So now it is white victimhood to the point of they are the real victims when it comes to racism. So why are you teaching about Black history and Black suffering when we should be teaching about white suffering? And that's where we're heading. And just yesterday, Ron DeSantis in Florida talked about mandatory teaching of Western civilization. We know that's code for white nationalism, folks. We know that's code for white culture. Steve King, the Republican congressman, the former one, who was banned from his committees and he's out now, talk about what's wrong with saying white supremacy or Western civilization. We all get it. We know what Ron DeSantis is doing. He's playing to the white nationalist core of the MAGA base, which again, it looks about 60% of the GOP seems to be true white nationalists, and the rest white nationalists friendly or okay with it, or they would leave the party if they weren't.
You know, the excuse me, the Republican Party and, you know, America in general kind of danced with this tiger, this danger for years and years, but kind of off to the side. You know, Nixon's Southern strategy, Reagan's Southern strategy, George W. Bush's anti-Muslim rhetoric. Now it has gone from being peripheral to the GOP. The Democrats have largely completely rejected it, but it's become peripheral to the GOP. It's gone from being peripheral to being essentially at the core. I don't know of any issue that Republican politicians across the nation are more upset about right now. Well, maybe anti-gay hate as well, you know, and Michelangelo's, you know, Signorelli does such a good job of talking about this on the program that follows this one on Sirius XM. But this seems like it is now full-blown in our face in America. Countries that have dealt with this in the past, I mean, Germany went through a horrible experience with this. They had to learn their lesson the hard way. How do we pull back from this? Are there any lessons of history or lessons of other countries that we can learn from?
I think abject victory, to put it in a nice way. We have to defeat them. We have to defeat the GOP fascist forces. History tells you with fascists, you're really confronted with a couple of options. One is surrender, or two, back. I guess the third is flee the country. Right. But of the two, really, that if you're going to stay here, and I hope we are, it's either surrender or fight. And I choose that we fight, that we stand up together, we fight back against their bigotry. And the first thing is raising awareness about how dangerous it is to ban books. And you mentioned the Nazis. I went through it on my show various times. The history of book banning in Germany, Nazi Germany, that turned into book burning, which then turned into Nazis going to people's homes and taking books out of them and like destroying their homes and physically assaulting them while taking their books. We are not far from that. Florida has banned the second most book country, and Ron DeSantis is gleeful. He was down in Manatee County yesterday, and that's the county where teachers are hiding their books because they're feared being charged with a felony. This is America 2023. You could be charged with a third degree in Florida if you bring a book to school that deals with race or the LGBTQ world, and it's not approved by Ron DeSantis' censors. How could this be happening? And if you ever wonder how in a democracy you can lose your freedom without being fired, you're seeing it with Ron DeSantis, and I call Florida DeSantis Stan. He's turned this into a world where he says freedom when it's like dystopian, like 1984 George Orwell. It's the opposite of freedom. Yeah. And that's what he's about. So we have to be very weary of him. He's very dangerous. Amen.
The Dean of Radio, Dean Obeidallah, his Substack is The Dean's Report at Substack.com, and of course, deanofradio.com. As well. Dean, thanks for It's always great talking to you. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Geeky Science, what you don't know about the coffee buzz, and a crazy alert, Tucker Carlson. Weird stuff going on. Also, what if Trump runs as a third-party candidate? Stick around. And welcome back. Lori in Ocala, Florida. Hey, Lori, what's on your mind?
Hi. I'm glad that you had Dean Obeidallah on because he knows Florida, apparently.
You're living it.
I am living it. I mean, I'm just going to, before I give you my Citizens Anti-Protection Act, I want to say two things. Critical thinking versus critical race theory. Critical thinking is something all parents and teachers should embrace because it teaches our kids to think. Critical race theory is a made-up thing, and that teaches children not to make white kids aware of their history. And they're trying to make this non-existent thing, but they're also taking away critical thinking. So Let's go to the Citizens Anti-Fascism Protection Act for obvious reasons. We need something to let Americans know what's going on first. They came for our Civil Rights Act, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then they came for our religious rights. Hobby Lobby, they buy their goods from China and they sell them to America, but they impose their beliefs on Americans. Then they came for our rights to control our own reproduction. Then they came for our libraries to control the history we teach. Then they came for specific groups of people, African Americans, LGBTQ, transgender. Then they came for the elderly, threatening to take away their Medicare, Social Security. They're cutting what you can get, and you can't get it until later in life. And now they're coming for public education. They're not addressing policing or guns, and that tells me we are at the point of fascism.
Yeah.
I don't say that. I'm just saying this is where we are, America. You know, we can elaborate on everything. They're very vague in their punishments. Oh, you're going to get punished if you know, and this is what DeSantis says. You're going to get punished if you vote. Really? Where do you go? We're going to sign cops there, and we're going to lock you up indefinitely. I mean, the punish is never written down. You have to do the act, the crime, in order to find out what the punishment is.
Right.
And that's the frightening thing. That's the scary thing.
Yeah, he arrested a dozen black people, just a few months ago in order to suppress the black vote in Florida. And it looks like it worked, by the way. The black vote was down substantially in the 2022 election.
It worked, Tom. You're right. Tom, can I tell you what made me think of this was your story that I heard you tell several times about China making up a law that told its citizens if they move, they have to report it to the government. Knowing full well that they move all the time, they'll never report it. So everybody is subject to being arrested, right?
That's right. Yeah. This is when everybody's a criminal, then the government has absolute power over everybody. Yeah. This was.
This is a wake up call. That's all.
I think it's an excellent one, Lori. I love your reinvention of Pastor Niemöller's famous note from the concentration camp. First they came for the Jews, et cetera. Very, very well done. Lori, thank you. Thank you for the call, and thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV there in Ocala. Much appreciated. 21 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. Stick around. It's Talk Media for the sane among us. We'll be right back. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. Donald Trump wasn't such a terrible president other than inciting an insurrection against the government, mismanaging a pandemic that killed 1 million Americans, separating families and then selling them off into foster care where they literally vanished, tear gassing protesters in Lafayette Square. He had the worst jobs record of any president in modern history. He tried to blackmail a foreign country to get dirt on his opponent. He fired the FBI director for investigating his ties to Russia and Putin. He took Vladimir Putin's word over U.S. intelligence. He caused the longest government shutdown in U.S. history. He lied nearly 30,000 times. He vetoed a defense funding bill because it renamed military bases away from Confederate generals. He increased the national debt by $8 trillion. He had 3 of the highest annual deficits in U.S. history. Well, the list goes on. There's actually over 250 things on this list, and about 2/3 of it is on a video over at ThomHartmann.com. Check it out. Welcome back. Picking up your calls here. Nick in Crofton, Maryland. Hey, Nick, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. Dean Obeidallah, really good guest. Listening to you, being 2 thoughtful people, and him talking about the state of Florida just made me think about a couple of things. Do you think that you want to, DeSantis, and now you're hearing, I think you reported that other governors, other states are starting to pick up this thing where they're canceling the teaching of Black history or all history or whatever they want to do. Do you think, one, that it's time for people? We still live in, it is sort of pseudo-democracy, but it's more of a capitalist society than a democracy. Do you think it's time for all like-minded people, like the kind of people like us listening to your show, to say, you know what, fine, do that. Well, actually, it's not fine, but I'm not going to vacation there. If I had a chance to move my family and live in a certain state, these states that are doing these kind of actions, I'm not doing that, because what else will they do? I mean, it just doesn't impact African Americans. It impacts all of us, because your previous caller and Dean had the same theme. When you do this, you go down the road of fascism and the loss of your democracy. So, yeah, that's one of the things I wanted to say is, you know, maybe it's time for some sort of galvanizing movement to say, you do that, we're not going to go to Disneyland. We're not going to, or Disney World, or whatever it's called in Florida.
Yeah.
We're not going to spend our vacation dollars down there.
Yeah, it's Disney World in Florida, it's Disneyland in Los Angeles, or in Southern California. I agree with you, Nick, and I would be very reluctant to go to Florida for any reason right now, to give them any of my money. I reported yesterday on this program that there was a survey that was just done in Florida. I'm sorry, I don't have the paper any longer to tell you who did the survey, but it was a fairly reputable group. And they found that they were surveying families in Florida who have a gay member of the family, and an openly gay member of the family. And what they found was that 60% of them are thinking of moving out of the state, and 22% of them are actively making plans to leave the state. Most of those being families with a gay member where they have children in the public schools. This is actually hurting people, and it's just right across the board. This fascist embrace of hatred. Violence is one of the things that is absolutely intrinsic to fascism. Fascism always rests on a foundation of fascism. The first thing that Hitler did was he put together his own Proud Boys. He put together basically a street gang. They were all volunteers. They all dressed alike. They were called the Brown Shirts. Mussolini did the same thing in Italy. He ended up with 20,000 of them when he marched on Rome and seized the government. And he called them the Black Shirts. But it was the same thing. These were street gangs. These were brawlers. These were people who like to engage in fights and things.
Tom,
go ahead.
I was just going to say, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I was just going to say, you watch any of these YouTube videos where they call themselves auditors, and they go in public buildings, and the Supreme Court has already ruled that you can take pictures in public besides the places that are prohibited, that are restricted from public use. Time after time, I want to say only 1 out of every 10 on the average that I watch are people that say, oh, yeah, you have the right to do that. Video after video, a person comes out and says you can't do it, and they call the police. This is you have to go, but it's ridiculous how people don't know their own.
Yeah. Well, it's it's really sad. We don't teach civics anymore. Nick, I get it. Thank you for the call. I'm not familiar with those YouTubes, by the way.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Tyree Nichols' funeral is going on right now, and they found no classified documents at Joe Biden's beach house, much to the disappointment of my right-wing colleagues.
Hartman University Book Club. Today we're reading from the Crash of 2016, one of my favorites. In her writings, this is from page 62, by the way, a middle-class primer is the chapter title. In her writings, which have become foundational for libertarian theology, author Ayn Rand suggested that the only purpose of government should be to prevent oppression by force. What she neglected to consider was all the force inherent in nature. If you're hungry, there is the force of biology. If you're homeless, you confront the force of winds, storms, ice, and rain. If you're sick, you confront the ravages and force of disease. These were the forces that provoked the first governments, the first communities, the first clans and tribes, the first nation states. It's easy for libertarian elitists, such as multimillionaire TV talking heads or college kids reading Atlas Shrugged, to talk about how there should be no government beyond police, the army, and the courts. They all have enough resources that they don't need to deal with the forces of nature. And that explains why billionaires would bankroll libertarian-leaning think tanks that will, when the crash comes with its full force, tell us it was caused by big government. However, in the real world, humans must confront both nature and other humans, which is why we create governments and why we create economies. But it wasn't until 1776 when Thomas Jefferson placed John Locke's right to life, liberty, and property, or replaced it, with life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that the idea of a large class of working people had the ability to pursue happiness, the middle class. It wasn't until 1776 that that was even seriously considered as a cornerstone obligation to government. This is also the first time in history that the word happiness had ever appeared in any nation's formative documents, as Jefferson wrote in 1817 to Dr. John Manners, quote, "The evidence of this natural right, like that to our right of life, liberty, the use of our faculties, the pursuit of happiness is not left to the feeble and sophisticated investigations of reason, but is impressed on the sense of every man." As Jefferson realized, with no government interference by setting the rules of the game of business and fair taxation, there could be no broad middle class, a sliver of small business and artisans, but the vast majority of us would be the working poor under the yoke of elites. The royalists know this, which gets to the root of why they set out to destroy involvement in the economy. After all, in a middle-class economy, they may have to give up some of their power, and some of the higher end of their wealth may even be redistributed, horrors of horrors, for schools, parks, libraries, and other things that support a healthy middle-class society but are not needed by the rich, who live in a parallel but separate world from the rest of us. As Jefferson laid out in his 1816 letter to Samuel Kercheval, a totally free market where corporations reign supreme, just like the oppressive governments of old, could transform America, quote, until the bulk of the society is reduced to mere automatons of misery, to have no sensibilities left but for sinning and suffering. Then begins indeed the bella omnium in omnia, which some philosophers observing general in this world have mistaken it for the natural instead of the abusive state of man. Although this may come as a sudden realization to many, we've really known it all our lives. In fact, in the 6,000-year history of the civilized world, a middle class emerging in any nation has been such a rarity as to be largely invisible. The United States has had two great periods of what we today call a middle class. The first was from the 1700s to the mid-1800s and was fueled by virtually free land for settlers stolen from the Indians and free labor, slavery in the South and indentured immigrant North. The result was, as de Tocqueville pointed out, the most well-educated, politically active, middle-class, non-aristocrats in the world. The second period didn't take hold until after World War II, during my dad's lifetime. Unlike the first, which was fueled by free land and slaves, the second had to be carefully constructed with specific and what might define as socialist policies put in place during the New Deal, which is more democratic control over the economy and workplace in order to keep the economic royalists in check. To both stimulate and balance the domestic economy, FDR reinstituted progressive taxation, which gave workers more to spend and gave the rich an incentive to pay their workers better to maintain a stable workplace, since if they took the money themselves, it would just mostly go to taxes, thus stimulating demand for more goods and services. Progressive taxation has a long history. As Jefferson said in a 1785 letter to James Madison, quote, "Another means of silently lessening the inequality of property is to exempt from taxation all below a certain point and to tax the higher portions of property in geometrical progression as they rise." FDR eventually hiked the top income tax paid by the super rich in America to 90%. This had a twofold effect. First, it held income inequality in check and ushered in an era of equal income and a growth among all classes. Unlike the Gilded Age, when the economy grew at a blistering pace but the gains were afforded only to the robber barons, the period between 1947 and 1980 saw unparalleled equitable growth. During these 30-plus years, the poorest fifth in America saw a 116% increase in their incomes. The middle fifth, 111% increase. Top 5% only saw an 85% increase. All income classes shared in the prosperity of the times when the top marginal income tax rate was above 70%. The second effect of a high income tax rate was to bring stability to the economy. And then it goes through the whole explanation of how that worked. The book is The Crash of 2016.
You're the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. Our podcast, The Hartmann Report, is absolutely free and available wherever fine podcasts are available. And the entire 3-hour podcast is available over at thomhartmann.com. Wondering what this new legislative session, the next 2 years, are going to bring us with the Republicans in charge of the House of Representatives? Well, Congressman Bill Pascrell put together a list that kind of summarizes what we should expect. 100% of the Republicans in the House of Representatives voted against cheaper gas for Americans, against cheaper insulin for Americans, voted against cheaper prescription drug prices, 100% voted against child tax credits, 100% voted against stimulus checks, 100% voted against the Voting Rights Act. They voted 100% against ending gerrymandering. They voted 100% against ending climate change, 100% voted against prosecuting rich tax cheats, 100% voted against saving Roe v. Wade. 99% voted against banning assault weapons or fighting domestic terrorism. The list goes on. I've got an entire video all about the entire list over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. "35 minutes past the hour. A couple of quick stories here, and then I'll pick up your phone calls. Coffee. This is our Geeky Science for the day. People think that coffee gives you energy, right? Well, not quite. This is Emma Beckett writing at theconversation.com. Nope, coffee won't give you extra energy. It just borrows a little bit that you'll pay for later. Turns out the main stimulant in coffee, of course, is caffeine, and caffeine works by changing the way that cells in our brains interact with a chemical called adenosine. If you've heard of ATP or the ATP cycle, adenosine triphosphate, ADP, adenosine diphosphate, monophosphate, this is how the body cycles energy, right? This is the body's energy transport system. And levels of adenosine rise as the byproduct of energy is being used in our cells. So what caffeine does is it binds to the adenosine receptors so that as adenosine accumulates, it makes us more tired, right? Because we're burning, basically we're burning adenosine triphosphate, and it's breaking down to diphosphate and monophosphate, and that makes us feel tired. But caffeine prevents our cells from knowing that adenosine is floating around because it binds to those receptors. And so we feel energy, but we still have all that adenosine floating around our bloodstream, and when the caffeine wears off, its half-life is 5 hours. When the caffeine wears off, boom. So that's how it works. You're not actually getting energy from caffeine. You're merely borrowing it from 6 hours down the road. Also, our crazy alert for the day, Tucker Carlson saying that Kamala Harris is taking hallucinogens. Really? She can't replace Biden, he said, but she can still hang around and amuse the hell out of the rest of us. Imagine your dumbest, most officious kindergarten teacher takes a ton of acid and then becomes vice president. She's not sober. That's like mescaline or something. And then he calls her a low IQ, terrible personality. Let me tell you, I think Kamala Harris is doing a fantastic job as vice president. The main job of vice president is to stay out of the president's way. But she's just, as far as I can tell, she has done an extraordinary job. I think that there's a very good chance that she's going to be our party's nominee for president in the next cycle. And I would support her. She's smart. She's tough. She's personable. I think she, and she has, generally speaking, very progressive policies, a progressive worldview. So that's, I think, why Tucker Carlson is going after her, because she's becoming more and more popular every day. So, of course, the right wants to go after her. Plus, she's the trifecta, right? She's a woman, she's a woman with power, and she's a woman of color. She has both African-American and Indian-American ancestors. So, of course, Doughboy is going to hate her. or hate on her. So picking up your phone calls here, Maverick in Edmonds, Washington. Hey, Maverick, what's on your mind today?
Oh, good afternoon. Good morning, Tom. I'd like to say real quick for the record that I cleaned out my garage last weekend, and I found 0 classified documents in there, for the record.
Okay, got it.
However, I did find a 1979 Braille Playboy magazine, and that's the truth.
Seriously? Oh, I know they did publish it in Braille. Yeah, that's incredible.
Yeah, they came out quarterly, and they were free if you could, just for the asking.
Yeah.
But anyway, Tom, thanks for your show. I want to ask you about the U.S. dollar being used as the international monetary unit of choice. This is kind of mysterious to me. I mean, obviously, people aren't trading briefcases full of the $100 bills, but what's the mechanics of that? How did that get started? Who chooses to do that, and what does that mean to our country? What does that mean to, just guys like me and you?
Yeah. The dollar being the reserve currency of the world means that we are not subject to, generally speaking, to wild fluctuations in price of imported goods or the value of exported goods. It stabilizes our economy, and it stabilizes the world economy because the U.S. dollar is a stable currency. The danger, the Republican default, and the reason why it became the world's default currency is twofold. One, starting in the late 1800s, early 20th century, everybody started denominating oil, the price of oil, in dollars. And once oil, and oil is kind of the reserve energy of the world, dollars are the reserve currency of the world. You tie those two things together, and it's pretty hard to separate them. China and a few other countries tried to put together a kind of a currency basket to denominate oil. It didn't work that well. The ruble was part of it. It was a mess. So that's the bottom line. If we blow up the dollar, which is what the Republicans are talking about doing, then it's entirely possible that the euro would be the thing that replaces the dollar. It's the second largest currency in the world. China wants the yuan to be the currency, the international reserve currency, but the more they threaten Taiwan and that sort of thing, the more I think wary people are of all that. So anyhow, that's the story, Maverick. Did I answer your question?
Oh, thanks, man.
Okay, good talking to you.
That helps out a lot.
Okay, thanks a lot. Mark in St. Petersburg, Florida. Hey, Mark, what's on your mind today?
Hi. All right. So apparently, there's a woman 2 days ago. I heard a press conference, and her name is Dana Galen. She's a Republican, recently named committee member or the chair or something. And she's black, and she was just spewing nothing, no truth. And she was saying the Republican Party is black people, and it's something you might want to play. It's a 7-minute thing. It's on WUSF Public Radio, Steve Newborn, and it was played on January 30th. And it's crazy. She says crazy stuff, but I believe that's black votes by trying to convince them that Republican parties for the party.
Yeah, the GOP has got a major outreach effort right now. They've got a minor outreach to black people. Tim Scott is in Iowa this week, pitching himself for president. He's African American. South Carolina. But they have a large outreach going on to Hispanics, to particularly Mexican immigrants. And, the Democratic Party needs to take this very, very seriously. So, yeah, I get it, Mark. I get it. Thank you. Ann in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Hey, Ann, what's up?
Tom, according to the United States Constitution, Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, anyone guilty of sedition is prohibited from running for or holding public office. Correct. If Attorney General Merrick Garland was doing his job, the insurrectionists who are running the House of Representatives at this moment would not and could not hold any elected office.
I agree with you.
How do we get the Attorney General to do his job? And finally, I just want to add, New Mexico is the only state that has enforced this constitutional law so far. Thanks, Tom.
You're right. You are, and that was a fellow who actually showed up on January 6th, didn't he? Wasn't that the basis for that?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I thought. And then Marjorie Taylor Greene in Georgia was the other. There were two cases that were brought based on Article 3 of the 14th Amendment. I don't know how to get Merrick
But if
Garland
our
to do his
Attorney
job. Ian.
General,
Yeah,
if he had been enforcing this law, they should all have been prohibited from holding office and serving in the House.
At least those who were clearly involved, and there should have been a more aggressive prosecution of them. I agree with you. I don't have any defense for Merrick Garland in this regard. I'm very disappointed. It's 2 years now since this crime was committed. I can tell you if you or I were to try to break into any other building, if your local Wells Fargo, we'd be in prison in a New York minute. But here we go. And thank you for the call, Mark in Portland. Hey, Mark, what's on your mind today?
So I'm wondering what power does the teachers union in Florida and other red states have in terms of saying, look, we're all going to go on strike if you don't adhere to a rational, accurate historical context of the African-American experience.
My guess is they're reluctant to do that because DeSantis will simply then use that to demonize them further. See, these are the people who don't want to teach your children. These are the people, who are forcing you to be stuck with your kids and that kind of thing. Just strikes can backfire.
Well, I think it's a conversation probably that needs to be had anyway, because what other power do we have to go against a fascist like DeSantis or Abbott or any of these other guys that are willing to just completely, dumb down, our population and specifically make white people more ignorant when it comes to their real African-American history. So,
well, the power we have is at the ballot box. I'm assuming your question wasn't rhetorical, and that's where we need to exercise it. We had a very, very near miss, a close brush with complete fascism here in the United States in the last months of the Trump administration. And if DeSantis rises to federal power, if he were to succeed to become president, and he's clearly heading in that direction, then we will be in another situation where we are facing the very real probability of ending democracy in the United States, or at least a pluralistic democracy, and ending democracy, period, and becoming a fascist state. It's a grim thought, Mark. It really is. Thank you for the call. It's 45 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archive.
Back on the other side of this with your calls here on the Thom Hartmann Program, fair and only slightly unbalanced. And welcome back. Marvin in Belvidere, Illinois. Hey, Marvin, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
Well, there's various things, and I hope I think clearly enough. I'm pretty old. I'm like 80, 81.
Good on you. I hope to get there too.
Well, as I told the lady who answered the phone, I'm more conservative. You're obviously progressive, right?
That's true.
And let me make sure I got the sound down on the TV there.
Yeah, it's good to turn it down. You'll be completely confused if you leave it up because there is a delay. So, So what specifically do you want to talk about, Marvin?
Well, for example, you said that the debt went up a whole bunch under Trump. I think you said that, didn't you?
It was when Obama, when they walked us up to the edge. Well, actually, the interest on our debt went up when they tried it with Trump, but they backed down really quick because it was obviously hurting Trump. But when they did it with Obama, they walked us right up to the edge of default, and it cost the United States hundreds of billions of dollars. It cost our country a lot.
Oh, well, maybe I misunderstood you. I thought you said the debt increased a lot.
Oh, Donald Trump added $7.8 trillion to the national debt. About $2.5 trillion of that was his tax cuts, and the rest of it was just, and about $2 trillion of it was actually stuff that I would not criticize him for. It was the spending around, COVID. But for Republicans, the game that Republicans have been playing since the Reagan administration is when our debt had been steadily going down. Franklin Roosevelt paid down part of our debt. Harry Truman paid down a lot of the debt. Eisenhower paid down the debt. Kennedy paid down the debt. Lyndon Johnson paid down the debt. Jerry Ford paid down the debt. Nixon paid down the debt. All of these presidents, all the way up until Reagan, our debt was steadily going down. We at the end of World War II, we were at 122% or 127% of GDP.
Okay.
And then Reagan reversed that, and our debt has been going up ever since Reagan, and it's because of Republican tax cuts. And what the Republicans do is they yell and scream about this when Democrats are in office, but they don't say a word about it when Republicans are in office.
But it's going up now?
Yeah, it's been going up ever since 1981.
Okay. Well, you just seem to emphasize how bad Trump did, and
well, it wouldn't have been going up if Reagan hadn't cut the top tax rate from 74% down to 25%. It wouldn't have been going up, and in fact, by this point in time, the national debt would have been paid off if we had continued on the trajectory we were on. That was followed by Democratic and Republican presidents: Eisenhower, Nixon, Ford. They all worked to pay down the debt. Yeah. It was Reagan who started us on this craziness. And of course, Trump doubled down on it. You know, Reagan cost us $4 or $5 trillion, in terms of his tax cuts. Bush added, $4 trillion from his tax cuts. And then you got Trump with $7.8 trillion. Am I making sense here, Marvin?
Yeah, you're making sense, but from my point of view, you seem awfully one-sided. You don't seem to.
I am a partisan.
Biden.
I will tell you. Right up front. I find that the Democrats are more consistent with my political philosophy and my understanding of how the country would be best run. I respect people who disagree with me, but that's where I stand. Marvin, I got to run. We're out of time. Thank you for the call. We'll be right back. It's 10 minutes before the hour. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. So you don't think generally of community gardening and cancer and heart disease prevention in the same thought, in the same sentence. But sure enough, this was published in the journal Lancet Planetary Health, a study that was funded by the American Cancer Society, the first ever randomized controlled trial of the effects of community gardening. And what they did was they started a garden. This was in Denver. It was 291 non-gardening adults, average age 41. And they gave them half of the group. They gave them a garden plot and some seeds and seedlings and an introductory gardening course. And what they found was by the fall that those people who were doing the gardening were increased their fiber consumption by 1.4 grams a day, 7%, which is substantial. And they believe that this will help them with everything from diabetes to certain cancers. It's absolutely a fascinating study. There's a whole video about it over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. 51 minutes past the hour, picking up your calls. Ray in Woodstock, New York. Hey, Ray, what's up?
Hey, Tom, how are you? Thank you so much. I listen to you on 104.1 every day.
Well, thank you.
I wanted to bring to your attention that this gender person, my name is Rachel, actually.
Okay.
And Donald Trump, you were saying that he's not using Facebook and he's not using Twitter. Well, I wanted to bring your attention that he is all over TikTok. And yesterday, it was frightening. He was saying that when I become president again, the only genders there's going to be is what you're born with. If you're male or female, and that's going to be it. And any of these doctors that provide hormone treatment blockers and mangling our society, I'm going to have arrested. I'm going to prosecute the parents. And I was like, oh, my God. I just couldn't believe what was coming out of this guy's mouth.
Yeah. I'm not surprised, Ray. I'm horrified that Facebook and Twitter let him back on, well,
he's not on there. He's not using them. He's using TikTok.
Yeah, and TikTok is huge with young people. That's really bad news. Ray, thanks.
Well, the other thing,
go ahead.
The other thing is do you know how many of these kids get bullied already, and how hard of it they already have?
Yeah. Well, that's why he's picking on them.
guy is he is so misinformed. He is uneducated. He just doesn't. I don't think his ideology when he banned transgender people in the military. His ideology and thinking is that they're all going to want hormone treatments and they're going to want paid sex changes. They don't care about anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
They're happy just being them.
There you go, Ray. There you go. Yeah, it's a tough one. It's a bullies always look for the most defenseless, the weakest that they can attack, and that's the trans people are a minority within a minority, and so that's the perfect target for these bullies. Ray, thank you for sharing that story with us, and thank you for calling. Charles in Chicago. Hey, Charles, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, how are you doing today? Can you hear me?
Yeah, just fine, Ray.
I wanted to reflect on the strategy of Governor DeSantis and the Republican Party, and this is going to take about 30 seconds. The 13th Amendment and the Ku Klux Klan were both instituted within the same year. A lot of people don't realize that the Ku Klux Klan started off as an economic situation where there were so many black people down south that were working. But once they became voters, they would outnumber the actual white citizens.
Oh, they took over the South Carolina legislature.
Right. So what the Republican Party's doing right now is they're trying to make states unpalatable for people of diversity.
Yep.
So that's the reason why they come with the attacks on the LGBTQ and the attacks on pregnancy. You got to understand that some of these states are, in federal elections, they're only lost by 10, 20,000 votes. So if I could make you hate the state so much that you leave the state, then I'm still here. And that's what DeSantis is doing down in Florida. So when you see people saying, well, I'm going to move and I'm going to leave and I'm not, don't do that because you're giving them, you're giving the state to them.
Yeah, I agree.
There should be more of us moving into those states to regain the balance.
I agree, Charles.
But that's a strategy that they're using.
Yeah, it's divide and conquer. I mean, it's the oldest political and military strategy in the book. I mean, Lao Tzu, right. Napoleon. I mean, divide and conquer. That's what they're doing, and they're doing it by trashing people who are not wealthy and powerful, which is just such a tragedy. Charles, thank you for that very well put point. Michelle in Chicago. Hey, Michelle, what's up?
Hi, Tom, how are you?
I'm well.
Good. Two things. Marvin was trying to get you to talk about the reversing of the deficit by Democrats, Democratic presidents compared to the Republicans. And then the other thing is, and it might be old news, but DeSantis has voted in, has not appointed, he's appointed conservative members of the Florida College, the new college.
Right. Yeah, they've taken it over. And this is a big progressive college in Florida. Absolutely. Michelle, I'm sorry, we're out of time. But thank you for making those points. They're very important points. Thank you very much. And thank you for being with us today. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. In the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport, as Bernie and President Obama used to regularly say, both of them. It ain't a spectator sport. You've got to participate. You must. My mother always used to say, never say God. You have to participate. So get out there, get active, tag, you're it. All right, there's a lot we can do. Have a great afternoon. We'll catch up with you tomorrow. Be good to yourself and the people around you.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
Bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online. We also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air. So you can find my